pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Excuse my tardiness, boys. The ladder requires my
Roll call. Levoy, we'll start with you.
Levoy, Hurley.
Steve Pothier.
Herbert, Tellman.
Grady, Rhodes.
John Cote.
Brian Bickel. Call to the public. We do have two members of the public here today. Would either one of you like to say anything to the commission?
I'm Mike Coltrin. I'm hoping to be appointed to this commission at some point, but we'll see.
Okay.
And I'm Scott Stewart. I'm the current treasurer of the Libertarian Party. After Chris Cole died, we're trying to find a new person to take over this role. It might be me, it might be somebody else.
Okay, well, welcome to both of you. E. Isaac summary. E. Isaac Wizard.
Yeah, so a summary it is because there's a lot of stuff that flows from there.
Can I request that, because we have two new people, that you explain what that is?
Yeah, except I don't remember what the acronym means, but the E-Isaac is it's a online resource that addresses a bunch of election-related things. Mostly it's cybersecurity, but there's a bunch of other things in there too. So I kind of took there's an email list that we as commissioners can get on, and I kind of went through the last month or so and just I picked out some teasers of what's on there. It does have, there are some things that are labeled as amber, which means we can't, it's okay for us to share it, but since we're in an open meeting, there's a limit to about what can be said there. So I'm going to identify a couple things that are amber, but I'll just basically say the title of the thing. So, okay, so there's a collection of different types of communications that come from this. There's the EI Isaac Advisory, an MS Isaac Advisory, and then there's a weekly news alert for EI Isaac and a monthly Cyber Tips newsletter from MS Isaac. And then there's a sort of a briefing. There's a quarterly membership call for EI Isaac, so you can dial into that. And then there's a CIS election security best practices that seems just kind of random times they send out information. Let's see, first item, this is kind of in most recent to order. There's a National Association of Secretaries of State initiative to combat disinformation, mainly in social media. There's a hashtag Trusted Info 2020 is the kind of the place where they're collecting that. The initiative is really targeted to be going on from November 12th to December 31st. There's a proposal for more government oversight for the election vendors from the Brennan Center for Justice. There's an amber alert that's for the threat landscape. Includes suspected account compromises, cyber activity, robocalls, misinformation. So that contains things like misinformation was for wrong polling locations and addressing voter eligibilities, basically saying people weren't eligible when they were. Another Amber-related communication was about the election cyber situational awareness room, which was open from November 4th to 6th. So this was for the general election. So they they kind of stand up these little, or maybe big, collection points for any kind of election hanky-panky that may be going on. There was various cybersecurity advisories in this past month that includes specific lists of vulnerabilities to things like web browsers and things like that. There was a notice of Russian cyber threat actors that have some continuing, they're continuing to develop tactics, and they talk about that in more depth. There's a MS Isaac monthly newsletter that has multi-state info sharing and analysis center information. There's a webinar for the EI Isaac on October 17th. There was a report of election meddling, and it highlights effective tactics. That was from the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Included things like they were seeing paid internet trolls, so people who basically professionalizing people to work in large-scale centers. And in that particular case, it was to obscure the Russian poll. There's a Defense in Depth series of articles, I guess, that's about cybersecurity approaches. There's a cyber guide for secretaries of state that it's an election campaign targeted by, oh, sorry, that was one thing and a multiple thing. Another thing in the same issue was election campaign that were targeted by Iran-linked hackers. So there's another item that's for official use only, but the title of that is just Russia may try to discourage voter turnout and suppressing votes in 2020 U.S. elections. So there's details about that. Then there was a summary of key recommendations from the Senate hearing on securing America's elections. So all that was a little over, from a little over a month. I don't know, I think maybe it was probably 20 emails in that time or so.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's a
Somebody's
lot of
really
stuff.
watching.
Right.
Just that I was paying attention, I'm going to take a shot at E. Isaac is Election Integrity Information Sharing and Advisory Center.
Yes. Great, thank you.
Very good.
And Brad Nelson has joined the meeting.
With our coffee.
With
Garov.
Okay, anything else as far as E. Isaac is concerned? I know we've discussed this in the past, Steve is, for whatever reason, anointed as a member of this organization. Is there any way we can feed information that he gets to the rest of the commission? I mean, listening to the stuff that's available and the issues that have been addressed, it would be nice to be able to at least read some of the documentation that supports it. But if we can't get it because we haven't been anointed, then is there an information sharing channel that can be established within or without the Department of Elections?
I think the answer is a yes, but let me contact that organization. I find, and certainly this is my opinion, perhaps not Steve's, is that I'm not certain I understand the restriction on some of the things that they put up, in that I think would be good for the public to be readily aware of. But let me check with that organization because it is their information. Whether they have a problem with it from making with Steve, assuming Steve doesn't have a problem, and then Steve being able to disperse it to the group.
Actually, Steve will send it to Michael, who will disperse it to the group.
Point of order, yes.
May I
Yes.
add something here? We should take advantage of Grady's talents. Grady's a high-level software engineer at Raytheon currently. Sure he has a bunch of damn clearances. So he's not an agent of any sort. Maybe he and Steve could collaborate on this. If you want to name just one person to be the person to get the information, that's, I would think would be acceptable, but maybe Grady could share it with Grady so that, I think this is the kind of thing, it's just kind of gummy enough that everybody could look at it and get a good idea. I'm surprised at the insight this man has sometimes on the electronics part of it, which is unlimited to that.
Yeah, it might be better to be an official receiver of the information, if that's what we would want to do.
I will make the inquiries to the organization. My guess is that they'll say, well, Brad, whoever you want to bless, can get it. So I don't see a problem, but I do want to check that box off
Sure.
before I let it go.
And if we get to the point where it's Brad, whoever you want to bless, then I would recommend blessing everybody on the commission.
That is exactly.
That way, there's no perception that information is being indiscriminately withheld or
Right.
I want to make it clear that I don't think that there would be information withheld. I just very much respect this man's talents and think he is a fine addition to getting the kinks of this. I understand gears and things I can put in my hands. I do not understand electrons.
And I do want to make the point that by doing a summary like this, it's filtering, right? I mean, that's the only way.
I get 5 or 6 a day.
I understand.
Yeah, and so I don't get that many, so I'm not sure if maybe some of yours aren't directly from this or on a different
I
channel.
think there's various levels of dispersal. Yeah.
And then the other thing is about what it can be shared. I think they are pretty clear about what can be shared with this fun color coding thing. Most of it, however, is it can be shared openly. There's a few of these amber, and there's been a couple that are, so the amber is, it says within your organization, so I take that to be within EIC, but not the general public. And then there's another that is to you can't share it at all. And there's been maybe 2 of those since I've been getting these.
I personally would not want to get 5 or 6 of these a day. I'm quite happy with somebody filtering.
I will see what's available.
I don't need to be on it either.
Steve may want to get off it.
It may not have anything to do with what this commission does, but it's nice to know information.
Levoy, do you want to be receiving the EIC information? I know how hard it is to hear.
Oh, I can hear fine, guys. I have my mute on, so it takes me a minute to respond, and just be patient. Yeah, sure, put me on. I probably filtered out there, but the hell, you know.
Thank you, and we do appreciate you muting the background information on your end. So if we address the question to you, we'll understand that's the situation and not assume you're not there anymore.
Okay, thanks. Now, I wouldn't want anybody to be triggered by hearing, Rush Limbaugh in the background or anything like that.
Thank you for that. Recorder involvement, and there's nobody's name associated with this. I will say that I have had conversations with the people running for recorder, since we are going to have a new recorder next year. Of the people that I know that are actively seeking the position, I think there's an opportunity to have more involvement. I know FN nor Chris Rhodes have been very excited about participating in what this commission does, but I think there's an opportunity with the new recorder on board. I'm not going to sit here and continue to poke FEM for the next 12 months and try and get her to change her ways. That ain't going to happen. If somebody else wants to poke her, knock yourselves out. But I think most of the stuff that we would like to do with recorder involvement, we can put on hold until January 3rd of 2021.
I agree.
It boils down in some ways on this issue to some of the things that that you guys have taken exception to in the past. I too understand that FN does not want to be involved, blatantly clear. She has said so. I think it's a shame, unfortunately, because we can't talk about elections without talking about that. I don't know who the Republican candidate will be. You've obviously spoken to Democratic candidates. I don't know who the Republican candidate will be for recorder. I understand we have one lined up, but I don't know that it's been announced. And I frankly don't know who it is. I've had some people ask me about the spot, and I've said it's a worthy job and it's a hell of a job that they have to do there. I would think they would all support broadening this commission and having her and her staff's involvement. And perhaps that's what we should talk about when we get settled after January. The first item on the agenda should be talking about what the responsibilities of this commission is. It was originally formed, as I understand it, as a part of the settlement of a lawsuit that was brought by your side of the aisle. And it, from what I can tell, has accomplished what it was set out to do. And if we are only going to continue to be Brad's integrity advisors, perhaps it's time for it to be dissolved. If, however, the board and the recorder should go on to see that it gets a little more involved and has a little more say-so in things, then I would encourage all of us to support that. Brad, in my opinion, and his people are ethical. There's integrity there. I don't see, in the narrow sense that its bylaws are written for now and its charter, so to speak, is given. If we're not willing to go beyond what it has, I don't see a reason just to sit here and kind of talk about esoteric things.
And in response to that, I would say, I appreciate your opinion and I appreciate your concerns, and I would suggest if you find this to be a non-productive use of your time, then I would suggest, I certainly
So far,
will
it has,
not, I certainly will not recommend to the board dissolving this commission. I think there are enough useful functions that it provides. If it doesn't cover the scope that you think it should, and the Board of Supervisors doesn't see fit to expand that scope, then my suggestion would be that you resign from the commission and make better use of your time if you don't feel it's worth your time being here. But I certainly wouldn't recommend to the board doing away with the commission. There's enough things that have happened historically. It's not a buzzword that this commission is doing things all the time, and we have an alumnus of the commission that just walked in the door.
I think we're getting on the agenda.
But,
I don't think we're off the agenda at all, madam.
We're more concerned the commission being dissolved.
We are a little, but not at all.
Okay, Brad.
So, we got there. Hold on, recorder involvement, so I read this differently. I thought this might touch on the subject of recorder involvement in the city election as part of receiving city ballots at their election sites, city ballot replacement sites.
I think that's item 8, November election.
Okay, I can hold off till then.
Are we on number 6?
How precincts are established? Okay.
Yes.
In the packet that you may have in front of you, as well as what you may have received online, you can find the statute that talks about designating election precincts. I think this is fairly cut and dried on how we go about it, as opposed to some other states of the union that say once a established election precinct has X amount of registered voters in it, once it exceeds that number, you have to establish another precinct. There is not a numeric value that is searched for in the statute. I can tell you that I do use numbers, if you will, data, and that is if a particular precinct has 1,000 registered voters, by and large, 70% of those are not going to go to the polls because they have placed themselves on the permanent early voting list. That means I only have about 300 people that are actually going to potentially come to the polls on election day. I have 13 hours of an election day from 6 a.m. in the morning till 7 p.m. at night, and can I process through 300 voters in that period of time? That's kind of a rough idea on how I do a numbers crunch on establishing precincts.
So basically, the way precincts get divvied up is pretty much up to you and your recommendations to the Board of Supervisors and what they accept or don't accept.
That's correct, and I think people here can appreciate that the fewer changes that can be made from previous election cycles, the friendlier it is to voters as I didn't know you changed my precinct, I didn't know you changed my polling places. So the fewer changes we can make, understanding that changes sometimes have to be made, but the fewer changes we can make, the better it is.
Is there a restriction on the number of precincts that we can have? Is that established by somebody other than Pima County?
I think that it's distinguished most by how many congressional districts and legislative districts and things of that nature, in which you cannot have one precinct have multiple jurisdictions in it. Now, you can certainly have multiple school districts, municipal district boundaries, things of that nature. But the districts that are established by the IRC, meaning the congressional districts as well as the state legislative districts, and then internally within the county, the Board of Supervisor districts, those are the baselines from which you begin to draw precincts from.
So a precinct cannot cross the Board of Supervisors boundary?
That is correct.
Okay.
Or a state ledge or a congressional
Yeah.
district boundary.
I just wondered how far down that.
Board of Supervisors is as far as it goes. The statute, as it mentioned here, says you don't have to pay any attention. That's not what it says. In fact, it says District 48, which are fire districts, health districts, water districts, sanitary districts, their incorporated boundaries of those districts have no impact on precinct establishment. Now, we do try and work as much as we possibly can hand in hand with the city of Tucson, because they have a ward way of electing candidates. And we want to make sure as we change a election precinct line for the county, which they use, we haven't somehow split a ward or moved an incumbent in or out of a particular ward that they are presently representing.
So,
Looking at two precincts, 27, which has nobody in it, and 127, which has, I believe, north of 5,000 registered voters in it. Is there any, and I understand why 27 exists, but when you've got precincts that range in population from a couple hundred to several thousand, is there any attempt ever made to balance that numerical scale?
The answer is kind of a qualified no. Certainly, we want to work with the recorder who maintains the voter registration data file for those individual precincts. I'm not certain whether I recall which one 27 is, but I think.
Definitely.
Okay, that's the one I was recalling as well. Part of the dynamic there is, as I mentioned earlier, that in Dove Mountain and other precincts, not that one, close to 80%, not 70%, but 80% of the voters registered in that precinct have placed themselves on the permanent early voting list, so that 5,000, or whatever the number might be, is reduced by 80%. To take my math a little bit further to get it in, we'd love to have 100% turnout. Never going to happen. So we also fudge it by another 20% after that. So the numbers keep going down. And then the other thing that we enter into is like, okay, if we are going to the Dove Mountain Country Club or whatever the polling place may be, how many people can we fit through there in a 13-hour day? How many poll workers do we need? Is the square footage of the polling place room and the parking spaces available, can that accommodate that flow as well? So there are things that are not mentioned in the statute, but to get to your question, do we try and balance them so that everybody's kind of have an average of arbitrarily 2,300 registered voters? The answer is no.
So you're driven as much by the people that you anticipate showing up at the polling place as you're driven by the number of registered voters within the precinct, if not more so by the former rather than the latter.
Yes.
How do you account for, as an observer of a polling place, there are spikes in people coming in. In the morning, there's a little bit of spike, at lunchtime, and then starting at 4, it starts, and there's a big rush at the end of the day when, I wouldn't say majority, but a big percentage of the votes, the people coming in to vote, come in after 5. So do you account for that as well?
We do, and Mr. Rhodes does make an excellent observation, which most of you may already be aware of. The spikes are first thing when the polls open in the morning, 6 a.m., people are on their way to work, school, whatever. So that's your first spike. It then, if you will, generally speaking, quiets down around 10 o'clock in the morning. Might have a spike at lunchtime, but not too bad. But then again, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it spikes again. We've not had lines here in Pima County for a considerable long time, and let me tell you what the statutes define as a line. And that is that a voter in line who is not greeted by a poll worker within 30 minutes is a long line. So in other words, if you're in line and the poll worker, and that line may be 5 people long, 15 people long, but if within 30 minutes of you entering that queue, you have been addressed by, not dropped your ballot in the ballot box, but addressed by a poll worker, it's not considered a long line.
What consists of addressing?
I beg your pardon?
What consists of having addressed someone out of curiosity? That's kind of a...
Well, that is not a term that's within the statute, but it's basically that they start the conversation, a marshal who's perhaps outside could say as much as, welcome, are you sure you're at a polling place? Here's where the sample ballots are posted, things of that nature. So it starts the process is maybe a bad way to put it.
It's interesting, 30 minutes is, that could be quite a line, actually.
Now then, to get back to Grady's thing about spikes, we have the availability, if necessary, to add additional poll workers to locations that may have those situations. With the advent of the permanent early voting list, that's pretty much a thing of the past. We may, and again, hopefully may not, but we may have lines at the presidential preference election that's coming up in March because we are reducing the number of polling places. And a lot of people in line, even though we're going to make our best efforts, are going to be people who are not eligible to vote in that particular election. But nonetheless, if they come into the polling place and the poll workers do their due diligence to say, I'm sorry, sir or madam, you're registered with a party that's not participating, or you're an independent or whatever else, if those people demand to vote a provisional ballot, we've got to do a provisional ballot for them. That's going to potentially delay the process. We are going to maintain the same number of polling places we had for the 2016 presidential preference election, which was, of course, all of the major political parties at that time. So we don't think we're going to have an issue with lines going into 2020.
Is this a Democratic-owned PPE?
It is a Democratic Party-owned PPE. My understanding, although it's...
Greens and Libertarians are not participating.
I believe the Greens had until, I want to say approximately 3 weeks ago to file, but chose not to. I don't know the dynamics of that decision, but it's my understanding that it will only be the Democratic Party. And some of you may not know, by law, nothing else can be attached to that ballot. There is the potential, though it's not going to occur in Pima County, there is the potential of a March election for school districts, recalls, things of that nature. And that could occur in other counties where a school district is in need of a recall and they're going to have an election the week before or the week after the PPE.
But they would then have two ballots, correct?
And two separate election days. They won't even be on the same election day. Talk about confusion.
What's the
So we
procedure?
may- Excuse me, go ahead.
What's the procedure for adjusting precinct lines, like, I believe you added the precinct in Vale outside of this timeline?
Yeah.
So what's the procedure?
So in that particular area, that was our last huge polling place, and this was down in the Corona de Tucson area, actually. The Sycamore Elementary School, if you're familiar where that is, was the sole polling place down in that area, and the population continued to grow, more and more residences all the time. So we probably could have gone through 18 and maybe 20 at Sycamore without having to make a new precinct out there, but we decided to get ahead of the curve and actually make a new precinct, get everybody used to no longer going to the elementary school for their polling places, but to the church going forward. But again, we try and keep those changes to an absolute minimum.
And that happened, right?
That happened prior to 2018.
And what was the change you made this year? I know you were running a line.
Up in the, I'll say, general Marana area where Twin Peaks Road hits Quarry Road, and I've not been physically out to that location, but to give you maybe an idea where it was, there was an existing precinct line from 2018 that was going through undeveloped land. It has since been developed, and indeed there are now residents in that area, and it was hypothetically going to split households right down the middle of the precinct line. So the precinct line was moved westwardly, in order to accommodate that new development without having to split it into two
So
precincts.
you didn't actually split a precinct, you just made it larger. I mean, you made one larger by moving the precinct line.
Correct. Two adjacent precincts and the boundary change.
So,
Just a moment,
Go ahead.
if I may.
Sure.
Could I answer your question?
You could.
Okay. Please.
I may have missed it, so maybe you probably said it. But as you're adjusting these lines, this is within your department and in consultation with anybody else, the recorder, or who is in that?
Certainly, we will alert the recorder that we are proposing some changes, and those changes will have to be, if approved, by the Board of Supervisors. So until that happens, all we do is kind of send up a flare saying, be prepared, this might happen.
Is there any citizen input to any of this?
That absolutely there is. What we usually do, and I'm not saying this is a hard and fast, this is the only organizations, we reach out to the political parties, to the minority language advocates, to the disabled population advocates, and also to our two Native American populations predominantly here. It is not uncommon for me when we have changes to bring them to this organization as well. They then have the opportunity prior to it going to the board to talk to me to say, yeah, that works, or let's fudge it a little bit over in this area, things of that nature. But because we've changed precincts on such a small scale compared to what we used to do, I haven't usually heard opposition or concern. Maybe that's a better word to use, is concern. Now, I think that's not the same as polling places. So in establishing precincts, that seems to be more or less a rubber stamp kind of thing. But when we get down to polling places, we want to make sure that we put polling places in areas that are convenient for people to get to, regardless of whether they're wealthy or not, regardless of whether they have a car or not, and things of that nature.
So are these concerns, which you very eloquently expressed, in writing anywhere? Are they, I don't remember seeing anything in the elections manual, for instance,
Well,
about it, but that's a 500 some odd page, or was, document, and,
The history of reaching out to some of those organizations was just good government at the time that we had to pre-clear all of our changes through the Justice Department. Because if I was going to change a line, let's say out in the Pasquayaki neighborhood, I guarantee you, Department of Justice is going to call the Pascoyakis and say, were you consulted about this change at all?
Okay.
So part of that is the legacy of doing that. Now, even though we don't pre-clear anymore, it's just good public policy to keep reaching out to those organizations.
So does this then go to, in the process of establishing this, I've lived here a long time, but I don't ever remember getting into this. Is this then brought before the board as this is what we're doing? Or it is? Okay.
Yes.
And that's usually done when?
Well, the establishment of precincts as opposed to polling places for 2020 has already been done by statute. If you'll notice here, it says it needed to be done by October 1st of the year preceding a general election. The only change we made in precincts was the line I just referred to out in the Marana area. Polling places are going to come a little bit later, and at that point in time, I'll go ahead and reach out to all the communities. Now, we are not imagining that many changes in polling places, so it is not going to be starting from a blank sheet of paper. We're going to basically say to those entities that we reach out to, here's what we used in 2018, also 2016 is what we're proposing to use for 2020, or we've had to change from what we used in those previous elections, or the previous election, singular, because the facility is no longer available, or it's a church that didn't used to have all-day childcare and now does, and they can't accommodate us anymore, yeah, things of that nature. But, so there will be time for public input, just from regular citizens as well, not just from those advocacy groups.
So is this being driven by the 2020 redistricting, 2021 redistricting? Is this just because you were asked to do this work right now?
To do what?
This topic?
Mr. Cote asked to bring it up.
Okay, so I was just wondering if this is prelude to redistricting, and then in 2021, 2022, that we could...
No, it happens every 2 years.
Well, I understood that,
Yeah.
but still, it's coming up.
Yes,
We did
this
think about it.
will pertain to that process when we get to it, absolutely.
And presumably, with the potential for the IRC completely redrawing lines, which they will do, that will cause precincts to change quite a bit.
Can we hold that conversation till redistricting, which is
Oh.
further down?
Yeah, okay. Very good, thank you.
Okay, anything else on precinct establishment and color? Bunching up. Okay, redistricting. This has my name by it. I guess I'm the one that has to have it on here. Understanding the timeline of when the commission is established, and I couldn't find anything either in statute or the Constitution that states when they have to render their final decision. Is there anything out there, or is it as expeditiously as possible?
I don't know the answer to that question. I know one of the things that was driving it last time redistricting at the state level occurred was we were still under the requirement to pre-clear any of our proposed changes to the Department of Justice. So the Department of Justice needs at least 60 days to review those proposed changes, and during that 60 days, ask questions if they deem it appropriate. If they do, another 60 days starts again from the time that they make their inquiry. So I think, I'm not certain that there is a hard date, but I know they needed to take into account that process of pre-clearance from DOJ in their submissions, and that's really the best I can tell you.
Because looking at this situation from a practical standpoint, since the legislature has pushed the back end forward, and the redistricting commission is going to push the front end backward, or the other way around. But the closer those two get together, is there any restriction, and I'm not asking you to speak to the legislative or the statewide races, but particularly the countywide and the local races, where boundaries may change as a result of redistricting? Or is the redistricting at the local level totally independent? And it can't be, because if a legislative district changes, then a supervisor district is probably going to have to change, simply because a supervisor district can't cross a legislative district boundary. If I understood what you said earlier.
I think you are asking, does this shoe have to drop here at the state level before we start locally? No, we can run parallel. And then once the state comes to this decision, adjust what we've done.
Okay, and from a candidate perspective, especially a candidate that lives near the edge, near the boundary line, and if that candidate has been involved in running for election in Supervisor District 1, which happens to be the district that I live in, and after redistricting, that district boundary has moved, and that candidate no longer lives within the district, then they're no longer a candidate in that district. Is that a correct assumption?
This comes up often. And so there has been some law in the past that allows for not only that candidate who thought he or she resided in the district that they were hoping to represent, but also the petition signatures from electors who thought they were going to be in that district. There is some wiggle room that's been allowed in the law, and it has gone, as one can imagine, to court multiple times, because a challenger is going to say, oh, that my potential opponent no longer lives in the district, Your Honor. He needs to be thrown off the ballot. So there, we haven't had to deal with that here at a local level call for quite a while, but there is some, I'll use the word leeway, gray area, that would allow a person who at the time they were circulating the petition, or at the time they filed their statement of interest to be a candidate, was operating under the best information they had at the time. That's as best, not being an attorney, never wanting to be, that's about the best I can tell.
Sometimes the candidates move.
Sometimes the candidates move, or at least they change their address.
Well, and I know in the Constitution, as far as the legislative districts are concerned, the IRC cannot consider incumbency.
I think that is, if it is to be considered, it is way down on the list. It is communities of interest and things of that nature. So, and communities of interest, of course, well, what does that mean? So,
And I guess since the supervisory districts that may be impacted by redistricting, we'll pick on Supervisor District 4. If Mr. Christie runs for re-election in 2020, and I'm assuming he's going to, if the district were redrawn, and as a sitting elected official, his district no longer encompassed his residence,
okay.
how is that issue dealt with?
If I'm following you, the new district boundary is not going to take effect until his
He's
successor
midterm.
term. Yes, okay. Does that get
Yes.
where you're going?
How does that, and should that boundary no longer include, he no longer lives in his district, but he's in the middle of a term, how does that impact his position?
I don't know. I don't know.
And just because it's never been an issue before, and looking at residences of various office holders, there's a lot of people that live a whole lot closer to district boundaries. Because it doesn't impact the legislative districts or the statewide districts, because the legislative districts happen every 2 years. But when you've got a 4-year term that spans a redistricting issue, and you could be redistricted out of the district that you currently serve.
It's possible. And I've heard, this was even before I started here as elections director, and that was in 2002, which was, of course, right after a redistricting, after the year 2000. One of the, it's my understanding, hearsay at this particular point in time, that one of the boards of supervisors didn't like the way his district was drawn, not because he was districting it out, but because his grandmother was, and she couldn't vote for him.
It's also my understanding that they do their own redistricting.
To a degree, certainly, when I was here in post-2010 census to do the redistricting, the Board of Supervisors got together a commission. We did meetings all over the area, and that commission, again, one appointed for each one of the Boards of Supervisors, then received that input from those commissioners and the public meetings that were legally recorded, and then came to their decisions. The other thing that, even though we're no longer under the necessity to do DOJ pre-clearance for any of our changes, DOJ will still be looking at certain districts to make sure that they are minority-majority districts. Right now, that impacts predominantly Supervisor Elias's district and Supervisor Ramon Valadez's district. I'm not certain whether Supervisor Bronson's district is involved in that, because I don't think there are, even though it encases most of the O'Loughlin Reservation, or I should say nation, but I don't think it's a significant part of the population. But as we're drawing those boundaries, we have to take minority majority into account.
And there is no population requirement on supervisory districts like there is on legislative districts. And
That is correct.
districts.
That is correct.
Okay. Anything else as far as redistricting is concerned? Michael, do you have
Arnold Urken has joined the meeting.
Yay! Where's the coffee?
you have a
So Mike, I did have a question.
Sure.
So the prior question, which got tabled until this item, but I'll be more succinct now. From the prior history, what's the likely percentage of precincts that will be redrawn?
Well, one of the big things going on there is, are we going to get a new congressional district? I don't know what the census is going to show, but if we don't get another congressional district, I would say the changes will be less than if we do. But I would guess we now have 249 precincts. We may still end up with about that same number. They just may be in different districts and the like. I would love to get rid of precinct 27 up on Mount Lemon, where I have 0 registered voters. I don't know whether that's ever going to happen, and I'm not planning on being here for the next redistricting. My best guess is that we may go up or down by about 10%. That's a guess.
And again, so that we have the train all in one line, that would occur when?
So the census is about ready to start, people getting their forms, people knocking on their doors, things of that nature. If my memory is an indication, we meaning the state and the respective counties, will get that census data in February of 2021. There we go.
which is when the redistricting commission gets appointed.
Yeah.
Anything else on redistricting? November elections. Brad, and/or Barbara.
Not much to say as far as the county is concerned. For those who may not recall, we had 4 school districts that had, for lack of a better term, financial questions on the ballot, and 1 fire district up in the Golden Ranch Fire District, which is the New Oro Valley and lops over into kind of the Saddlebrook area within Pinal County as well. We had 146,000 round numbers of people eligible to vote, approximately 49,800 did cast a ballot, so about a 34% turnout for I don't have it broken down by district, but for that entire body of people who were eligible to vote in that particular election. It was an all-mail ballot election. All of the questions posed to the voters passed, save for the question in the Sunnyside School District.
When will the precinct level results be on the website?
They are on the website now.
They were last night.
They were yesterday. As a CBS file, so you're not going to get it as a PDF. It's
Yeah,
gonna-
I was looking for that.
Okay.
2019, not yet available.
It's a CSV file.
Yes.
CVS is the drugstore.
I'm not familiar
Good
with
try.
the boundaries of the Golder Fire District, but I do know, and you said it well, it slops over into Saddlebrook up there. Seems to me we're in Pinell County. And so your county, Pinell County.
Good question. The answer is no. So Pinell County ran the election for Golder Ranch in Pinell County, counted their ballots. This is not unusual. We have fire.
Congressional districts are run, well, Congressional District 1 is run in 6 or 7 counties.
We have, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, it's a fire district called Mescal J6, which we share with Cochise County. We share Sonoita Elgin Fire District with Santa Cruz County. And so having districts, not congressional districts and things of that nature.
Special district.
Yeah, special districts expand. It also happens in school districts. I used to be the elections director up in Mojave County, and the Fredonia Moccasin School District was in both Coconino County and Mojave County, still is. So those individual counties count the ballots for their voters in that school district in that county, give those to the county school superintendents in the respective counties. They then aggregate those two reports together and come up with a final canvas.
So taking this to the next, backing up for a second, within the Golder District, just to understand that for half a second, complete the puzzle, you counted 49,000 of about 100. How many?
No. Out of all of the districts,
All of the districts.
so all those school districts, I have 149,000 people eligible, round numbers. Out of that pool, big pool, 49,000 cast a ballot. I'm not
So
certain
that
how many.
includes the school districts as well as.
Yeah, not just Golder Ranch.
And then whatever they did up in Pinell County or whatever is another story.
Yep.
Got it.
Yep. And I have nothing else to say on the county's aspect of the November election.
Okay, on the city election, I think you all received a letter from Karen Judy. All three parties were represented in almost every day of tabulation. Richard Fridena managed to miss the last few hours with the inaccuracy because he went to Hawaii. We had, let's see, it was extensively observed by all of us. We watched the tabulation and kept very close records of how many ballots were done. It's very impressive that they spent a lot of time trying to find one or two lost ballots, and one or two strange things happened. There was one envelope that had the instructions but not the ballot. And so the county was able to try to reach that person, had a phone number, try to contact them. Did you want to vote? Do you want to bring in your ballot? And that person never responded. Benny White spent an enormous amount of time reconciling the figures that he had daily of how many ballots had come in and how many ballots were reported voting, and he found 3 discrepancies. One, and all 3 were resolved after probably 2 to 3 days of intensive work on his part. One was that he suspected that federal-only voters were being allowed to vote. And that was not the case. They confirmed that with the recorder, that all of those were had become citizens by the time of the election. Under the new regs, you have more time to establish your citizenship than you did before. So all those 17 established their citizenship between the original deadline and the current deadline.
What is the current deadline for establishing citizenship?
So it's right before
So it's inside the 29-day
It's
window.
way inside, it's right
to
before,
register.
it's 2 or 3 days before the election.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the ability to cure.
So those were resolved. There were another bunch of ballots that he couldn't account for, something like 200 ballots. And those were a problem in terms of the new laws requiring identification when people request a ballot at the vote center. In the new procedure, instead of those ballots going to the recorder, went directly to the city, so they were never recorded as the recorder having gotten them. So those 246 ballots came directly to 12th Street rather than the recorder. So that was resolved. And let's see, there was one more, can't remember, there was one more small discrepancy, which was also easily accounted for. So the total number of voters balanced the total number of ballots that were processed, taking into account some that couldn't be processed. So we feel it was a very carefully run election. We had absolutely no problems, except one of the scanners started wearing out. By the second day, they kept rejecting ballots and it was very frustrating.
Can you clarify if that was one of the tabulation machines, or was
Yeah,
that one of
that was
the
a scanner.
affidavit
It was a
scanners?
scanner,
Okay,
the tabulation scanner.
okay.
In it, you
The
just
DS
had,
850.
yeah, you just had to feed the ballots through sometimes 4 or 5 times before they would be affected. And sometimes they did. They had duplicators right on the scene, instead of the county system where the duplication is taken elsewhere and then comes back to the tabulator. It's done right there.
Were ES&S personnel present?
No,
Okay. For those of you who don't know, ES&S is the vendor who sells and maintains the scanners.
yeah, she was there briefly at the primary. There were no problems and they just went ahead with that.
Do they attend the county elections?
If we ask them to do so, they will be here. That's not unusual. What we usually do is they'll reach out to us saying, do you need us? We'll often say, not really. And they'll say, well, we're going to come anyway, because by sitting in Tucson, if Santa Cruz needs us, or Cote needs us, or Graham County needs us, we're already kind of in central, an area to dispatch. So we often have them. It comes in handy from time to time, but having them there thus far has not been critical.
We were here pretty much in force in 2014, which I believe is the first election. We ran the equipment that we currently have.
We purchased the equipment in, that's too soon, I'd have to go back and look, but 2014, we were still on the old global, the old kind of system at that particular point in time. We were probably in the process of purchasing what we have now, but I think 2015, some of the special elections there were some of our first, and indeed the first county was 2016, I believe. Now you can go, and you may be right. My recall is fading quickly.
Then they were here big time in 2018 as well.
Yes, oh yes. Yeah.
But I remember the last category. There were 3 ballots that Benny still couldn't account for after we spent, I think, 3 days or so trying to do this. And these turned out to be 3 ballots that were cast by people who went out to help some disabled people. And so those did not come in the usual count to Benny, but it did, in one other category, there were a bunch of confidential voters, and those are not reported to the parties because they are confidential, but they are voters. So all the numbers were matched very nicely.
What is a confidential voter?
Somebody like the sheriff who says, I don't want my name made public.
Often people under orders of protection, as you might imagine, under voter registration information, so like some attorneys, some judges. So it's not just officers and deputies, it's people within the law enforcement community.
And there was one other problem reported, and that were lines at the Udall Center. Apparently, they underestimated the number of people who would show up. They estimated that about 300 people would come to the Udall Center based on past experience. When it came close to 500 people showing up, they quickly went to a nearby vote center and picked up a bunch of ballots. So there was a short line at that point while they waited for the ballots to come. There were also anecdotally quite a few people in line who did not live in the city and were demanding to vote. And most of those people were convinced that they had the right to vote, and a few of them voted provisionals anyway.
Can you speak to the issue that Karen mentioned in her memo regarding presenting voter identification when they dropped off ballots, wherever they dropped off ballots? And those
Sorry,
ballots,
what are we referring to? Who's Karen?
should be
The author of this
the memo,
memo.
but she talks about the people coming in and providing identification at the time they dropped off the ballots, and those ballots were processed by elections there rather than going to the county recorder's office for verification of the affidavit.
Yeah, so this was a new
That's my
process.
understanding.
Yeah, that was the first category I mentioned. It was a new process the city had worked out with the county, that they just took them directly rather than doing them to the county.
I think I need to clarify that, make sure I understand it right. I believe that they're not dropping off ballots, I believe they're getting replacement ballots. They present
Yeah,
their
you're
ID,
right, you're right.
and then, because they present their ID, I'm not sure if they have to sign or not. I would hope that somewhere they have to sign
Their affidavit.
Yeah.
their affidavit, but the affidavit does not have to, according to this, does not have to be verified by the county recorder because they have their ID with a signature on it that can be presumably verified at the polling, at the collection site.
So the process sort of is a hybrid of voting at the polls and voting early. And the statute wasn't totally clear on some aspects of how that should be handled.
I have one further thing. I was an observer at the recorder's site as a party observer. I was there at 5:50 watching the recorder set up out in front of the signature processing center that they have. I brought in my own ballots, county ballots, and placed them in the ballot box. And then about 6:15, I watched an individual come up to the door and read a sign saying that they would not accept city ballots. He was upset because he had heard on the local TV station the night before that this was a site where he could drop off his ballot. I don't know if he didn't hear a qualifier in the TV program that said it would not accept city ballots there as only county, or if the TV station did not properly qualify that in what was aired. However, he did call a phone number and he was redirected. He was kind of upset at the distance away from the polling place that he had to go to drop off at some school. Shortly thereafter, I think around 9 or 9:30, there was, I believe it was called an emergency station set up. Is that correct, Brad? That it's called an emergency station that you set up in your Europe.
If I may, yeah, so for those of you who are not familiar with the physical location, it's just down the road here, 6550 South Country Club. The recorder has a portion of that building and a door that's readily accessible by the public, and that's one of the locations that was set up, as I understand it, again, I'm a little out of the loop on this, where people could turn in their county issue ballot.
This is between the glass door and the wooden door?
That's correct.
The lobby area?
That's correct. Okay. We did not need to open the election side of that building because we were not designated as a receiving center for the county nor the city ballots at all, because we just assumed it was being taken care of in another part of the building by the recorder. When I asked my staff, have we received any direction as to whether city ballots were being accepted at the county recorder's location, there was not a definitive answer. So I gave Roger Randolph, the city clerk of the city of Tucson, a call and said, Roger, if we have somebody come to our office with a city ballot, what do you want me to do? You want me to take them? Or do you want me to send them someplace else? And he said, I was paraphrasing the conversation, he said, go ahead and take them. And so we started that, between the 8 and 9 a.m. hour approximately. And then during that day, at the end of the day, we had accepted 157, as I recall, city ballots at my office on that day. And I was just placed.
As opposed to the recorder's office.
I don't know how many the recorder.
No, but you were accepting them at the elections office.
Right.
And possibly at the recorder's office as well.
My understanding during that day, and Grady would have a better understanding of this, is that the county recorder's office continued to accept county ballots only. Those individuals who walked up with a city ballot and a county ballot, I placed myself literally in their shoes, saying that's going to frustrate the heck out of me if I have to go jump in my car and go to another place. Let's go ahead with the city clerk's direction and accept the ballot. So that's what we did.
It was Roger's understanding that they had already made an agreement between the city and the county to accept each other's ballots. And maybe that wasn't conveyed to all personnel. There were a lot of ballots exchanged.
So I think there's a difference here between what the recorder was directing her staff, and so it's the county recorder and the county election center, Brad's jurisdiction. So I think there was maybe a misunderstanding that it was everyone in the county, every location set up to receive ballots was accepting all ballots, and that was not the case. The recorder was clear by pre-posting on the door that they were not accepting city ballots. And every site, my understanding, was turning people away with city ballots that the county had. They had a number of replacement sites around the county. And so this was not something the recorder was going to do. And this was known by her in well in advance. I'm not sure what communication there was to Roger at the city clerk's office, but either there was a miscommunication or there was a lack of pre-planning to account for that.
I believe that as the day went on, that was cleared up.
At that site, I'm not sure about other
I
sites.
think it was cleared up also. There were a lot
Can you
of
elaborate
ballots
on that?
exchanged. Pardon me?
The county was accepting city ballots at
That's
other
my
sites?
impression, that Roger contacted the recorder's office and made that clear that there was an understanding. I can't guarantee it, but
I'll
that's.
have to look into that because, and speaking Wednesday afterwards, speaking with Evan Rodriguez, she did not indicate that was the case, so.
I don't know, but apparently there's some other lack of communication somewhere along the line. But that was the intent of the city at least.
And my intent was to make it just as convenient as possible.
And the city certainly elected a lot of, picked up a lot of county ballots that were turned over to the city.
So, excuse me. So, I think that might be all I have to report on the election in November.
And also, it's off this agenda, but the last 2 paragraphs of Karen's letter should be taken into account. She disavows herself from the previous memo that said that she had been consulted on the memo. She had not. So please read those 2. I can't discuss it because that part's not in the agenda.
Okay.
Are you through?
I'm through.
So if I may, Chairman,
Yes,
right?
yep,
I just want to address that comment on the shooting memos that Barbara just brought up. Frankly, I don't know why she chose to put that in a elections report because it's completely off topic. But because she did, it does need to be addressed and it's on the record. Fact of the matter is, that statement is false. You was consulted. You was communicated with before the September meeting. Unfortunately, some of the emails that John had sent back and forth were lost in his computer crashes over the summer. But I was able to retrieve from my own email a copy of a correspondence and acknowledgement from her on August 24th, 1 month before the September meeting, where she says she saw the video and learn of the report for the first time.
Just because of Brian Bickel's chairmanship, this has been happening for a while.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's what you said in the letter.
Well, I think you have copies of that. John, do you have copies of
I
that?
didn't bring copies of it. I didn't deem this whole thing worthy of answering because it's a blatant lie.
As I said, this is not on the agenda.
Let me-
Well,
we're way off the subject here.
No, we are not off the
Yes,
subject.
we are.
No, sir.
Karen
no, we're
Schumer's
not.
letter.
No, we're not. The letter was part of the report. It is therefore not off topic. It is in fact false, and it needs to be corrected because it is on the record for the EIT.
It was placed
It's on
on
the
the
record as
website.
Karen's statement, and that's how it remains as Karen's statement. If you want to split it down.
What I'd like to suggest is that the chairman, Mr. Bickel, communicate with the shooting and request a correction for the record of the EIC. We cannot allow a false statement to go on the record of the EIC.
And we cannot allow it to assume that it's a false statement because you say so either. So
Wow.
let's move on
I
to the
have
next
email trails, Barbara, that show that she was aware of this report before she claimed she was.
Okay, well, neither her memo nor the original report, and I've looked at it 3 times during this conversation, is on today's agenda. If you want to put it on the agenda for the next meeting, I'd be happy to address it at the next meeting. But there's nothing on here that mentions.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I object.
Well, you can object, and your objection is no.
Carrie Schuey's memo is part of the election report, which is on the agenda.
November election,
Is it not?
our current agenda item, is that not correct?
No, that's
It's
a
not.
topic of discussion about, Karen Schuey's memo was addressed to me as the chairman.
It was distributed.
Wait a minute, it was distributed. It is not on the agenda. And if you want to bring,
Of the election.
if you want to bring it up as an agenda item at the next election, I'd be happy to put it on future agenda items for the January meeting. But it is not on today's agenda.
Well, then why did you allow Barbara to read from results from that memo?
Because they pertain to the election, and she had numbers here that were significant.
I object to this whole thing. This is cockamamie stuff.
Good. It's cockamamie,
It is
but-
cockamamie, and it's cockamamie on your fault.
No, it's
If
not.
you bring this letter up, she speaks to the.
I didn't bring
I
the
can't-
letter up.
Well, she did, and you allowed it.
Okay, we're moving on to the next subject.
Oh,
And you
okay.
can
It's
file an
convenient.
object, you can
I
file it.
object.
Good. Moving on. Bylaws changes.
Baloney.
So at the last meeting, specifically, the bylaws regarding the attendance were discussed as a couple things. And I was asked to submit some suggested changes, which I did. I did a couple of them. I think you guys have got copies of them. I'm not going to go into a long discussion because of telephone difficulties, but I put forward 2 alternatives, very similar. One is basically removing the calendar year and going to a 12-month or a 12 previous meeting measure for it. And then I removed the percent and changed that to a hard number because it's kind of hard to figure out, if, what is it, 80% of 12 or something like that. So basically it comes out to 5. So anyway, I'll throw those 2 out there. You guys can discuss them. If you like them, want to modify them, whatever, but that's, I fulfilled my task, I think, for the meeting.
Okay, and Levoy, I'd like you to stay on the line because I submitted a change as well. And if we're going to go to the trouble of amending the bylaws, it's cleaning up, a lot of it's cleaning up and getting some consistency there. I took voting member out and put commissioner in there. And we basically referenced commissioners everywhere else in the bylaws. It was one of those things that got overlooked. And the only people that are voting members are the commissioners. I cut the number of consecutive regularly scheduled meetings missed from 4 to 3. I think if you're missing 3 consecutive meetings, that has a significant impact on the commission. If the remaining commissioners vote to remove you, you have the prerogative of going to your appointing entity and asking to be reappointed. There's nothing that prohibits that. And I changed the number of scheduled meetings. And I called it a rolling window of 12 meetings, because we're only required to meet 9 times a year. And traditionally, we've only met 11 times a year because we haven't historically met in December because nobody's here, or presumptively nobody's here. And I changed it from maybe removed by a 2/3 majority vote, because the way it read before, it said maybe removed by a majority vote, and then the last sentence required a 2/3 majority vote. So you had a conflict of requirements to remove somebody within the same paragraph. Either it's a 2/3 majority or it's a majority. So I basically eliminated the last sentence that said 2/3 vote of eligible commissioners shall be required for removal, and said it's a 2/3 majority vote. Not a majority vote. It was a statement that I felt linked itself to significant misunderstanding. So basically, it's cleaning up some of the language, redefining, rather than a 12-month period, a rolling window of 12 meetings. And if we ever got to the point where we only met 9 times out of the year, it would be significantly longer than 12 months, or had the potential to be significantly longer than 12 months. And I just cut it from 3 to 4, or from 4 to 3 and 5 to 4.
Yeah, my comment. Yeah, I think those are good changes. The rolling window thing, Ryan, was kind of my second alternative there on this proposal, where I said 12 previous meetings. So yeah, the 12, I'm actually kind of like the rolling window idea myself. Yeah. And I don't have any issue with any other changes.
Should they be consecutive windows, or should they, I realize we don't ever meet in December, so you couldn't have 12 consecutive meetings. But how do you account for swinging into another time?
Well, actually, we do have consecutive meetings. November, January, those are consecutive
all right.
meetings.
But you don't
We
say
didn't
that.
meet.
You say,
It says regularly scheduled, so
Regularly
if they're not
scheduled.
scheduled in December, that's not part of the consecutive.
so is there wording needed for that to accommodate that understanding?
It's perfectly clear to me. I mean,
I'm fine with it. I think regularly scheduled, I think, addresses it.
I have a couple questions. One is, it seems like you, in some cases, are going to go through a lot of trouble to try to remove somebody when the person who appointed him or her is consulted, you get a different point of view. And if you recall, a few years ago, when Brad has stepped out, our big problem was getting people to stay on, and we bent over backwards, even though people had missed 2 or 3 or 4 meetings. We couldn't find out why, and we tried to communicate with them, they didn't respond. We didn't have this in place, so we never actually did anything because we were, I think, consensus was there was a concern that they might come back and we would be relieved because we couldn't find anybody else. So I think just putting this on the agenda without any sort of qualification struck me as a little bit cavalier. Secondly, because of personal experience, there's no discretion with respect or definition of what a missed meeting is. I mean, if you were in an auto accident and hung up in a hospital for 2 weeks or two months, would you still consider that a missed meeting? I mean, it's something not quite right. And finally, you talk about notifying the person who's going to be removed by majority. But you don't say how much advance notice you give that person to mount a defense. Day before, 2 weeks. I think there ought to be some specific description of time there. Finally, this is some kind of trivial issue in a way, that it turns out not to be trivial, that when you talk about who the voters are, the quorum, and we've been in this situation where we were missing 3 members because the parties didn't or couldn't find people. So we have 7 commissioners. So I asked, well, how many commissioners do you need to take the vote of the 10 that are supposed to be there? That can make a difference, obviously, and if it's 7, if that's the minimum number, then if is the majority vote or 2/3 of that even enough to eject somebody from the commission? I just think, you said you were looking at percentages rather than trying to be specific because you were concerned about the difficulties of doing the calculation. But I don't know if you recall, when we wrote this the first time, even though it was somewhat annoying, we spent some time saying, well, what if we only had X members on the commission? And what if we only had a certain number show up for one reason or another? Are we going to allow 4 people to make important decisions for the commission? The way the rules were written, that's possible. And that's what I'm wondering if that could be the case here. I mean, this is not as important as perhaps some other decisions, but if you look at all the possible things that could happen and that have happened in the history of this group, I think maybe you want to be more specific about the numbers and not use percentages. Yes.
I do want to point out that our authority is pretty limited. We can communicate to the board. We can, through the election center, send out letters, but we cannot do much of anything. Just recommend to the Board of Supervisors.
Of course, yeah, sure.
So I just want to clarify.
But it is an important step, yeah.
Understood. And then the way I read these versions is that as far as time given to for a person to respond with a defense, as you refer to it, it would be the normal at least 24 hours, because that's when the agenda item would come out. And that's what they would be expected to do if they were participating with the board with getting the information, that it would be available at least 24 hours in advance. So I'm not sure that giving a longer time for defense than 24 hours is really something that I would agree with.
They would also see the draft agenda in advance of those 24 hours. They would have gotten the draft agenda with the item.
That's true.
But legally, they would have at least 24 hours.
Well, not to disagree with my friend here, but it occurs to me that what the hell's the hurry? If we waited till 3 meetings have been missed and then all of a sudden you want to expel him, okay, I understand that. Arnie's point is maybe he should be given some chance to defend himself, and maybe the remedy is quite simple. Maybe he would appear at the next regular meeting after having been given notice of having been in violation of this particular part of the minute, and defend himself, and if not, he would be removed. Give him notice, ask him to appear at the next meeting, and to defend himself, or submit someone to defend him if he needs, and get on with it.
And that's in the bylaws the way they're currently written. I mean, we're not changing anything there.
Okay, so
The only significant change here is we had an issue, and I raised it, that when Michael did the calculation, he was using a calendar year to come up with number of meetings missed. And I said, well, if if you miss January, you've missed 100% of the meetings, if that's the way we're gonna do the calculation. To me, the most significant change proposed by either myself or Levoy is it's a rolling 12-month period. It's not a calendar year. That eliminates the problem of saying, if you weren't here in January, you've missed 100% of the meetings. Goodbye. And I'm not advocating that anybody would do that, but certainly somebody that took a literal interpretation of the bylaws using a calendar year, and it didn't say calendar year. That's just the mechanism that Michael had used to do the calculation.
I think those are good suggestions, but the other part of it, let me draw an analogy. When we wrote these bylaws the first time, there was no restriction at all on challenging the current leadership of the commission, so that I could propose to have a vote right now to have a new leadership in the commission. And I forget who proposed it, but I remember that we had a long discussion because I suggested that in terms of parliamentary practice, good practice is to avoid situations which are done on the spur of the moment. You want to try to have as much time to have reasonable thoughtfulness and deliberation for a decision like that, because there are all sorts of bad reasons for doing these things. So, in connection with this issue we're talking about here, I think we should be a little bit skeptical of the potential motives of people in trying to vote people off the commission, and have rules that are as reasonable as possible to avoid that, regardless of partisan leanings or anything. So that's why I'm in favor of something that's more along the lines of what John suggested, to have ample time to respond, and to also tighten up the minimum number of people under the various possible scenarios of who the voters are. I mean, that's another thing. You say commissioners, they have to attend. I mean, if you say you need 2/3 of the commissioners and they don't attend, then can you still have a vote? Well, it's not so clear from the language. I think it would be better to tighten it up by saying in some way that there's a minimum number as a quorum that has to take a vote, and that 2/3 of that group have to make a decision. And I think if you look at the numbers, you see that it's kind of silly to have 2/3 of a very small number throw somebody off the commission.
May I make a suggestion? Mr. Chairman, why don't we let Arnie and Levoy come to some compromise on this, with language that is suitable, and bring it back at the January meeting or the February meeting, whichever is more appropriate, given the holidays and individual volunteers' time. And address this so that it is comprehensive in the sense of allowing a defense and time for a defense, and so if you have 6 members that's all you have that show up, that's a quorum on 10. But for a long time, we suffered only with 9 because of Chris Cole's departure, unfortunately. And for many months, we were without a Green candidate as well. So is it 10, is it 8, is it whatever? 2/3 of the majority vote of the attending members. Is that the language you want? This gets kind of sticky, and I don't think anybody should be removed without defending themselves, that's for sure, regardless of what this is all about. And I didn't think that through when Levoy and I talked about this, which we had a conversation or two, not very extensive. And so what say you to that idea, Mr. Chairman?
Well, excuse me, Levoy was trying to get a word in before. You still there, Levoy?
Yes, I'm still here. Yeah, just one thing, I think in some respects to be careful not to overthink this thing, okay? I would first say this procedure, the thing, this is not mandatory. Okay, nothing says you have to do anything when a person gets this meeting at all. I look at this as a fail-safe part of the bylaws that allows the commission to deal with a non-participating member of the commission. And I was arguing your point, I'm thinking about keeping commissioners on there. We don't really want to get people off the commission. That's not the goal of any of this thing. But you do need a procedure, a process that you use, in my opinion, in extreme cases to deal with the situation. I mean, if you have through certain this, you say, hey guys, I got the card. Yeah. Okay, that happens, you know. I'm not going to really take you off, damn sure. So I think they're a little careful about getting too wound around the axles on this. But if there's a fail safe, yeah, there's a name tightened up, but you know, that's still, again, I don't need to make a procedure that accounts for every possible little situation to the creed that's going to be encountered.
Well, and I would say, well, two things. It does say may remove, it doesn't say shall remove.
That's true.
And I will plead, I'll fall on my sword and say, I misread the documentation the way it was currently written, and I would rescind my proposed change, because what it does in the last sentence, it requires a majority to remove, but it defines that it's a 2/3 vote of eligible commissioners shall be required for removal, which means if we have 10 commissioners, then 2/3 is 7. And we have 10 commissioners. It doesn't say the number of people that are on. We have currently 10 commissioners. Whether we have all those seats filled or not, eligible is the key word there. So it would require the assent of 4 people to remove somebody from this commission based on attendance, the way the bylaws are currently written.
So you're proposing to unstrike out?
Well, I'm proposing to put, and to John's point, if Levoy and Arnie are amenable to it, and I'd like to sit on that group as well, because I sat on the last group when it was Arnie and myself and Chris, and looking at this proposed change to one item in question, having read through the bylaws, there's a number of other things that need to be changed as well. This being the 5th set of bylaws that I've dealt with this year. We list Michael as an ex officio member. Michael is not an ex officio member of this commission. Brad is an ex officio member of this commission. And an ex officio member is a person who holds a seat on this commission based on the fact that they hold a position in another organization. That's Brad's situation, it's not Michael's situation. So there's some housekeeping that needs to be cleaned up in the bylaws, but I think, and we are only a year from our mandatory 5-year review anyhow, so it's probably a good thing. So Levoy, if you're amenable to sit on that group, then it would be you and me and Arnie, and if you're not, we'll find somebody else.
So, on this bylaws topic, I do want to include another thing on your radar, and that's the annual report. There's only been 3 annual reports, at least on the website, over the years from this commission, starting in 2011. And so I think an annual, it doesn't specifically state, but if an annual report is being done in December, that probably is a bad thing, and maybe part of the reason why it was never done. Yes.
There's an annual report that's been done every year.
Okay. All right.
That's one point. I do not believe that there has been an annual report done every year. The other thing is that usually the annual report is taken on by whoever's the next chair. It's generally not done in December. It starts out in January is when the first topic is discussed at what's going to be done.
I I was gonna say start of the summer, but whenever it comes out. But I would like to understand if the website just does not have these annual reports that are coming out, or if they just did not occur. And I don't think we need to discuss this any further here, but I think that should be an item on the bylaws update agenda.
Just one other point. I just noticed looking at on the agenda, we're going to discuss the composition of the commission. And some of us have talked informally about including in the formal way some participation by the reporter on this commission. Would this be an opportunity to consider including that in the bylaws in some sort of flexible way so that it can be recognized properly as a procedure? Or not, or just do it if you do it? I'm sorry?
Go ahead,
I think you
Levoy.
have to change the charter first. I believe you have to change the charter first.
And that, yeah, I would not make any recommendation for anything regarding the recorder in the bylaws.
Well, I wasn't thinking necessarily directly mentioning the recorder, but that the commission itself could invite other members to be ex officio members, not voting members. So this relates to the question
Not
of,
ex officio members.
okay, but the general, maybe we just wait to talk about composition.
Yeah,
I have a question here. If we're broadening the bylaws,
we're not. And
no, if we're broadening the work that you and Levoy now and Arnie are going to do, I would like to make one suggestion. That is that we produce with each of these meetings a written report to the board. No one is going to sit there for 3 hours and watch this. It's just humanly not done, usually. There are some that do it, but that's a very rare number. We have an annual report which gets buried. And so if we're going to do this and not have the kind of misunderstandings that we had at the last board meeting and perhaps the board meeting prior to that, maybe we should be doing a monthly, and the chairman should do the report, a report to the board of what we do. That's not unusual with, in my own experience in the past with zoning commissions and whatever. It becomes fairly routine because you have a canned version here of an agenda, you have a canned version of what your report's going to say. And we approve the report and submit it.
okay, point taken. The bylaws committee will discuss it.
I'd like to make a motion that we do that.
Is there a second?
That's not on the agenda.
No, it's not on the agenda.
I see what we're talking about bylaws. Is it in the bylaws?
No.
Where is that covered, if someone could give me some information?
It's not.
I don't think that it's.
You made a recommendation that the bylaws committee consider it. The bylaws committee will consider it.
I think they should.
So, I think it should be considered. I'll second it.
It's not on the agenda. You
So put it on the next agenda, Michael, please.
So when we get to future agenda items.
Remind me. Please. Thank you.
okay, anything else on the bylaws?
So what did we actually decide?
Well, I'm waiting for, well, since you woke up again, are you willing to participate in the bylaws committee?
I am. My preference would be to keep this piece that we've been discussing separate if we want to get it done. Because if we go into a total bylaw thing, it's going to be a long time waiting.
I'm not as concerned with this piece being a critical issue And I don't want to do the bylaws piecemeal. That gets to be more problematic because you start making changes, one change here and one change there, all of a sudden, something affected, something, then it turns into a whack-a-mole issue where they're not done as a whole, but we've addressed the issue, and obviously there's differences of opinion. I certainly didn't walk out of here or walk into here today with the expectation that we'd amend the bylaws today.
So the question is, regarding the bylaw review, is there anything in the bylaws that define the composition of the bylaw review committee?
No.
Is it the three of us adequate? Or,
Well, if you get too many more than that, you run into the danger of public meeting violations because we have a quorum of this group.
Also, there's,
True, and I don't like big committees either, so that's fine with me.
just one other observation, the past practice is that the work is best done over coffee, and that the last person to come to the meeting buys coffee.
Does that include here?
Levoy,
And bylaw change,
knowing you this way as well as I do, Levoy, are you sure you don't want to add cookies to that? Coffee and cookies?
no comment.
Anything else on the bylaws? All right, reimbursements for PPE and special elections, Brad.
I have
This was John's issue.
I have an email from Janine Petty, who serves as the Deputy Director at the Arizona Secretary of State's office, and the subject is PPE reimbursement information. We, meaning the state, will be providing more details regarding the PPE reimbursement process. If you have any questions in the meantime, please contact our office. So that's about as stale bread as you can get in response. So
What is that fellow's name, please, again?
it's a female. The name is Janine Petty. She was the Deputy Elections Director, is now, and was in the previous administration. And so she is knowledgeable, though I'm sure she is just a conduit for direction from further up in the staff of the Secretary of State's office.
Okay, she's in the SOS.
That's correct. And all she's doing is sending out, and this was not this communication was not specifically to Pima County.
Right.
This was to all counties, both their elections departments and their recorders. And part of what this is about, even though her message was very short, is that in past administrations, things were reimbursed that weren't reimbursed in future administrations or current administrations. So there has been a change going on. One of the examples is that many jurisdictions across the state of Arizona actually have their programming for that specific election parameter done by the vendor. Others, such as ourselves here in Pima County, I have my own people lay out that ballot within that same piece of software. And so when you're a county and you're having that vendor do your programming for them, you're going to get a bill from that vendor for that programming. I don't know how much it is, but arbitrarily we'll say $5,000. Well, in some Secretary of State administrations, they deem that as being reimbursable and some not. So what she's alluding to is what they anticipate reimbursement to be in the future. Statutorily, counties only receive $1.25 per active registered voter. Now that's the county again. So that pool of money, if that's what indeed comes, needs to be shared for the expenses incurred by both the elections department and the recorder as well. In the past, when we've had, like 2016, we had both major parties involved. The reimbursement rate did change. And it's not going to change this time because it's in statute. Okay? So we are, at times, we've never been overpaid, but at times we're more in the red than others.
I do want to get clarification. I believe the statute says the number of eligible voters, the one
Active registered.
active registered
What
voters.
consists
That
of
means
active?
that would include Republicans and independents in a Democrat-only PPE.
Well, see, that's part of the interpretation. So we have, round numbers, approximately 500,000 registered voters. If you are to take, who are active, if you were to take 500,000 active registered voters by $1.25, you're going to get what, $650,000. It's still not going to be enough, okay? But if you decide no, the interpretation is that it's only Republicans, and therefore, I don't know how many Republicans we have, but let's say 180,000, you're going to get $1.25 per 180,000 Republicans, then we're even more in the hole in that regard.
And in that regard, since you can't participate in a PPE as no party declared, they should never come. I mean, we never get reimbursement for that.
That's part of what this communication is all about, is that we've been all over the map of presidential preference elections, rather than you, counties, this is the state saying, here's what we anticipate the reimbursement to be, and what we can reimburse you for. For example, my people are going to, I mentioned that we don't send our programming outside to a vendor. Well, my folks, that's all they're involved in for about a week. And that's not just one person, that's several people. So I have hundreds of hours that I'm incurring that I don't get reimbursed for. They're not doing other things. They're working on the presidential preference election, but we don't get reimbursed for their time. So it's always been a horrible reimbursement rate, even from 1996 when we first had our very first PPE, and we've been losing more and more as we go forward.
Does additional money have to come from the legislature, or does it come from readjusting the Secretary of State's budget, or both?
I think it's both. My understanding, and again, I'm way outside the communications on this, but my understanding is Secretary Reagan did not budget any money for the 2020 presidential preference election, so it was up to Secretary Hobbs. When she came in, she made her original request for, because she didn't know at the time how many political parties were going to be participating, though it was an assumption by the legislature, it's only going to be the Democrats, so we're not going to give you the full amount of money that you requested in the budget. So, but they did say, if additional monies are needed, come back to the legislature and we'll give you more money, or at least consider giving you more money.
Where did the $1.25 come from?
I have no idea.
So, in a sense.
But that's a 1995 or $4.25, because it's not changed since that time.
But it's now in the statute. That was what your question was.
Well, no, I was questioning the origin of the $1.25.
To get into the
Because
statute.
no matter what you do in an election, you have a fixed level of cost that's there, and then you have something that's variable because it's number of ballots and that's it.
Yeah.
But you need to, that clearly needs to have some attention by, is that anything that on, to your knowledge, on at the Board of Supervisors level or at the recorder's?
If it's in statute, it's a
Excuse me,
legislation.
I have the floor. Is it anything that the Board of Supervisors or the recorder is attempting to take to the next, step it up for these obvious, perhaps,
The answer is a qualified yes if I'm following you. Every time we have a presidential preference election in which we are left in the red because the amount of money we are reimbursed for does not cover our expenses at both the recorder's office and or the elections department, Mr. Huckleberry informs the board of that issue and seeks to get legislation changed in future years for that to change. And that is not unique to Pima County, that's unique, that happens in all of the counties, because we're all ending up short.
you're all on the whole.
Yep, yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It mentions PPE in special elections. Is the reimbursement any different for a special election?
The last special election that we had, and I suppose I need to identify what I mean by special election, is one that is called by the state. Our last one, it was in 2016 in May when we had what was commonly known as the Prop 123 election. At that particular time, the legislature did allocate enough monies to, as was projected by the individual counties and given to the Secretary of State to aggregate to say, here's what the counties say it's going to cost. And so we were fully reimbursed for the Prop 123 election. Now, they did make some restrictions to keep their costs down, and that is that just like in the presidential preference election, they made all counties cut the number of voting precinct polling places in half. So there was some biting at the apple, or so to speak, around the edges of trying to make it as cost efficient as possible. But I think they recognized, as opposed to a presidential preference election, which is only a small, depending on how you view it, a subset of the total voter registration file, in the Prop 123 election, everybody was going to be eligible to vote in that election. So whenever there's a special election called, it changes. The other special election that comes to mind is, of course, the Congressional vacancy election we had when Congresswoman Giffords resigned her post. The legislature set aside a separate budget for that to reimburse both the portion of that congressional district in Pima County as well as Cote County as well. So when these things come up on the legislature's radar, they are usually provided enough budget to cover the cost that the counties incur, but not always.
Getting to my question through the back door, since it's not on the agenda, the buck and a quarter applies strictly and only to the PPE.
Correct. Unless when they order a special election, they incur that.
But the buck and a quarter is not a factor there.
No.
But it sounds as if, for some class of elections, the amount is actually negotiated. So that when the governor just recently said it would be too expensive to have another senatorial election, there was no number or a range of costs that people were thinking about, right?
Certainly, Pima County was never approached by the governor's office or anyone else saying, if we ran a special U.S. senatorial election, how much would it cost? No.
Is there, we talked about this last session, or at least I think I raised the issue. Is there historically kept track of your costs in these types of elections versus the reimbursement? And can that be charted out in such a way that an argument can be made to the legislative bodies and maybe supported by this group, that this needs to be looked at and be redone in a different way?
As I mentioned, every time that the county gets short of their money for an election that the state has called, or is required to do so by statute, I know that our Board of Supervisors and Mr. Huckleberry reach out to members of the legislature, the Secretary of State's office, and others to try and get it changed going forward. So to answer your question, yes, certainly we have to provide our request for reimbursement to the Secretary of State. So it's itemized on there how much money, how much we incurred in our expenses in every presidential preference election we had back to the very beginning of presidential preference election. So that's a matter of public record. That the Secretary, so I would suggest, if you're interested in it, don't just get Pima County, get the entire state, because everybody's coming up short.
If we may, I'll touch base with you after the session's over. I
Get
think
in line, Grady.
endorsement of, I know what that line's like. Yes, sir.
Okay, anything else on PPE special election reimbursement? BOS legislative agenda. This got put on here by the Republican side, I think. You guys wanted to.
And I had my name on it if I had put it in, so I did not.
Well, so I don't have any report because I don't know what has been going on with the Board of Supervisors. I don't know if it was presented to the Board of Supervisors or if it's been passed. This would be the Republican Party's request to Chuck Huckleberry for some legislative changes. And so I don't know the status, I don't know how it's gone.
And I would say,
Well, I don't have the status.
Grady, you know, and I'm assuming when you're talking about the Republican Party's request to Chuck Huckleberry for legislative changes to deal with the memo that you guys submitted, that would be something totally separate from their legislative agenda. The Board of Supervisors, and I'm dealing from a memory perspective, and I'll call on Beth if she's willing to provide the information, but I think normally the Board of Supervisors puts their legislative agenda together in the late fall. And basically, it's their direction to the county's lobbyist as to what his focus is going to be during the upcoming legislative session, which is completely different from
No,
what's
it's not true.
now. And if there's an intent on the part of this entity to provide input to the Board of Supervisors on a legislative agenda item that we, or items that we would deem appropriate for them to include in their legislative agenda, operating significantly ahead of their timeline, and that probably should happen in the June, July, August timeframe from this group to get to them in the September, October, November timeline, which I'm assuming is about when Mike Grassie's going to see his direction from the Board of Supervisors.
So when the Republicans talked to Chuck Huckleberry,
Right.
this is the meeting that you're aware of because you had a
Right.
concern about
Yeah.
this being the EIC, it appeared to be an EIC effort and it was
Right.
Republican. Okay. In there, Mr. Huckleberry told us that he'd be willing to include our recommendation of legislative changes to put it on the county's legislative agenda that would go, that would then allow the lobbyist to work with the state legislature to make those changes. So that was what Chuck had offered us. We took him up on that, provided what the changes we wanted, and so that's what I was referring to. I don't know if that went to, that got on this, or if they voted, if the Board of Supervisors voting on it.
That, I would suggest you look at the Board of Supervisors meeting minutes and agenda.
There's a fire hose here. I don't have time to look at everything. That's one of the things that slipped through the hole.
You know, that's,
Well, who put this on the?
Yeah, so I'm reporting what I know, and I was
Still
hoping
on
that
that,
maybe
so I don't
other
remember.
people might be able to give me feedback of what the status was, but apparently it's, everyone's in the dark.
well, and looking at it from my perspective in the issue that I raised last month, the perception came from Mr. Huckleberry rather than from you guys, that this was a work product of the EIC, which it wasn't. It was a work product of the Republican Party. And as such, if you're concerned about the progress of that particular memo, then the Republican Party can follow up with the Board of Supervisors as to whether or not any of that information ultimately made it into the Board of Supervisors legislative agenda.
One last comment, and then I'll bury it. At the last meeting, you asked that we bring to you a recommendation in each meeting, or a series of recommendations, and not the whole thing. I think, in fairness, that's probably delays it out too long, takes too long to get through the points and such. And if we're going to do that, we're going to have an honest discussion about that. We have to go on through it in some orderly fashion. Grady spent a good deal of time on it. Levoy spent a good deal of time on it. I spent a good deal of time on it. Former Commissioner Bill Baird spent a good deal of time on it. I'll leave anybody off. Anyway, one item is much too short. And if we're going to do this, we need to do it in an orderly manner. And we'll try to abridge that somewhat in January and going forward. But it's not going to be just one item. It may be one big item at one time. maybe several items at another time. That's my concern.
Noted. Anything else? Responses regarding the UIC letter to the BOS, I have not received anything back from the Board of Supervisors.
So let me see if I understand this particular. I sent you a draft that was to address to Mr. Huckleberry. I know you must have gotten it on the Monday or thereabouts after the meeting, because I corresponded with Michael. You asked me to send it to Michael, I did. Following Friday, I get a kind of a follow-up that hasn't happened. In the following week, I think, maybe I'm off a week, I have inquired what's going on. No, you haven't gotten it yet, but it's coming. You got a letter that's gone to the Board of Supervisors, but it's been addressed to Chairman Elias. And it's because Mr. Huckleberry is on vacation. But I learned that from Michael. I learned that from you. I left it be. This is your board. Not mine to rattle the cage too much. So then we come around to the Board of Supervisors meeting after that. And maybe it's, the problem is that you and the chairman buried the resolution that we passed, because both of my Republican commissioners tell me they never saw it. Now, I guess I'm old-fashioned, but I sort of smell a rat in all this. And I don't care for it one bit.
So what do you propose as an action?
I would like to know what happened.
I was directed to send a memo to the Board of Supervisors. I did.
You were not. You were directed to send it to, we asked that you send it to Chairman, to Mr. Huckleberry, who we report through, who then goes to the Board of Supervisors.
I have no obligation to send anything to Mr. Huckleberry.
Well, you didn't say that. So I'm understanding that you hand-carried it down to Mr. Elias.
No, I didn't.
Oh,
I
okay.
sent it to Michael and asked Michael to distribute it to the Board of Supervisors.
All right. So you never met with Mr. Elias about this? I see.
So did it go to all of the supervisors, or did it go to the chair?
It was addressed to, which is the chair of the Board of Supervisors. Just like if somebody wanted to address this commission, it wouldn't go to everybody, it would go to the chair.
So it
The
wasn't.
chair then decides to distribute it to everybody else. That's the prerogative of the chair.
That's-
I
So
have no.
it wasn't sent to the board, it was sent to the chair.
It was sent to the chair, which is how I respond to the Board of Supervisors. When I do the annual report, it's addressed to the chair of the Board of Supervisors. Who
I
shares
find all this just too unusual to be perceivable.
And actually, I would like to make a note. You sent me a copy of this through email.
Right.
That was also, that email was also addressed to Mr. Elias. I did not send anything to them. That was done by you.
Okay.
Well, the resolution itself is addressed to Chairman Elias. And I had requested in my draft that it be sent to Mr. Huckleberry for distribution as he sees fit. Somehow it got delayed until he was on vacation. I don't understand that.
Well, and I'll address your concern.
Good.
I asked you for a draft to be sent to me, so I didn't have to create the thing from scratch. My correspondence is back and forth with the Board of Supervisors. If you want to send something to Mr. Huckleberry, knock yourself out.
Okay. I think I'll probably just do that. Now,
So you do realize this was intended to be from this EIC and put the letterhead of EIC, and that you're saying that if we currently mark it as draft, coming from the EIC, that you would be perfectly fine in sending that to Chuck Huckleberry. Because you have concern in the past about Chuck Huckleberry indicating that something came from this commission.
Okay, I'll give you the logistics. If you want something to come from this commission, then it needs to come from the commission. I'm not gonna let one half of this commission draft a document, give it to me for my signature to send to Chuck Huckleberry to say it's from the EIC. Draft your draft, it'll be distributed to everybody on the commission for comment and input. And if there's a majority consensus that it come from the EIC, then it'll come from the EIC. If there's not, then it's not gonna come from the commission. If you, on the other hand, as the Republican members of the commission, not operating as the commission, want to prepare a document and send it to Chuck Huckleberry, neither I nor anyone else can stop you from doing that, but it is not a function of the commission.
So, as long as we change, it's not on a formal letterhead, and we say that this is not the EIC, but the same contents.
Knock yourself out.
Okay, so we'll just properly change things and forward it on, saying that this might, something very similar to this might come from the EIC later on.
I wouldn't mention the EIC, Grady, it just makes life simpler.
I would like to read this motion. Thought I wrote it fairly. I considered Arnie's suggestion that it be made that it was not a majority vote. It's important because in this city election, which we've so glowingly discussed today, the outer envelopes and the affidavit disclosed party affiliations. And that's voter suppression. And in Arnie's words and personal conversations to me, that's outrageous that that kind of information is on the envelope and on the affidavit. So I'm going to read it so that it's a matter of public record. And I want you all to think about this. The October regular meeting of the Pima County Election Integrity Commission, commissioners were presented a copy of the standard city of Tucson ballot affidavit for the November 15th, 2019 general election. The form shows printed irregularities that could result in voter fraud and were malicious judgments and acts carried out. A copy of the affidavit, the envelope, is attached. It's not attached to this, but you've all seen it. The envelope clearly displays voter information that should be private above the signature line. A copy of the affidavit envelope with private information blanked out is enclosed and shows, in this particular case, Precinct 218, Ward 4, Party Republican, Voting Party Republican, VA 218-4. Additionally, under certain circumstances, the affidavit and the information it includes may be legible from the outside in the return envelope before the return envelope is opened. Think about that. Shoe on the other foot.
Are you reading from that?
I'm reading from it.
Just a question. Happened with Democrats too, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And I might say they should be rightly outraged. What was that, please? Would you repeat it for the audience? They should be, right. Do you believe they should be, Ms.
No,
Tellman?
I don't believe that any election law was violated in doing that. This is the way it's been for 6 years with the city. And in Maricopa County, the information is actually on the outside envelope.
I have nothing to do with Maricopa County in this nor do we in this conversation.
I'm saying,
I
I'm
might add,
asking you what law they violated in doing that.
I'm not adding that they violated any law, and if I could quote a law, I would.
There is no such law.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm happy you're so proud of that, because you're participating in voter suppression too.
John, don't over.
No, this is an irritant to me. I'm sorry.
I know it's irritating. So many things are
Disclosure,
irritating.
I feel
Finish the memo, please.
disclosure of the party designation is personal information that should not be available to anyone who may be handling, receiving, processing, or tabulating cast votes. At the very least, it has the effect of eroding confidence in the handling of elections. Questions of elections integrity at every level spill over to other elections. The City of Tucson's perceived disclosure of private information could possibly have an adverse impact on the integrity of all Pima County elections. I'm willing to discuss that, by the way, because I would guess that 99 out of 100 people that you would quiz in this county do not know that on major years, the county handles it, and off years, the city handles it. At a 5-3 vote, the members of the Pima County Election Integrity Commission request that the Board of Supervisors send a letter of concern, boy, we're really being rough, aren't we, to the City of Tucson recommending that the election officials investigate the cause of this irregularity, its possible consequences, and the effect, if any, on the ongoing City of Tucson election. Wow, that's really a strong condemnation and we couldn't produce it? I don't know. I'm disappointed, disgusted, and it's outrageous that that occurred.
Well, I totally disagree with you. And
I would
totally
imagine you
disagree
would.
with the comments of your party chair on things that he thought would happen.
Would you care to elaborate on that?
No.
We're off the topic of discussion here, ladies
Oh,
and
okay,
gentlemen.
well, I have to defend that. We did file a complaint
I don't-
about the nature, with the election commission, about the nature of these ballots. Ballot packages, let me be clear.
We'll see what the result is. If they find that the city violated any statutes, then action will be taken.
So there is some concern.
Can I ask a question here? Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Sure.
go on.
We seem to have an agreement that no law was violated. So I could infer from that makes it okay. I mean, do we really want to go down that road? Because I can go through a whole bunch of stuff. If that's the case, that's, quote, not illegal. But it's definitely not okay. I mean, really, seriously?
Doesn't bother me at all. I didn't even notice that it was there on my ballot.
So-
Great.
I do want to
Because
point
it's
out,
not against the law, it's okay. Great.
You don't have a reason for a complaint if you don't have a legal basis.
Great.
so there is some concern that ballots in Ward 4 were not received by Republican voters in their mailbox. And that was one of the reasons why there was a very long line at the Udall Center on election day. And there's concern, there's questions about how they did not receive. A large number of Republicans did not receive their ballots in their ballot box, or in their mailbox. Obviously, with the party designated on the envelope that this is being sent to them, it could be obvious to somebody to take out only one party's ballot and not another. I'm not making any allegations, I'm just stating that in general, this is a bad idea.
Don't disagree.
So having said that, I'd like to make a motion that we reintroduce this as a resolution to be sent in its existing form as written back to the board via Mr. Huckleberry, or to the board as you so fit. You want to send it just to Chairman Elias, that's fine. Go ahead. But I really believe it should go to Mr. Huckleberry for distribution to the board. And I believe it should be considered at the next Board of Supervisors meeting.
Question, I'm not knowledgeable enough to answer this question, but what's the difference in sending it to Mr. Huckleberry, Mr. Elias, or both? I mean, do they both get it anyway, right?
Who puts it on the agenda?
Sorry?
Who will put it on the agenda? for their meeting.
Well, I don't know, is that the big issue? Who's gonna put it on the agenda?
If it's tabled, if it's not tabled, if it's not seen because it's not put on the agenda, that's a problem. And I think that's what happened here.
I was told that it was decided that this wasn't requested to be discussed at the Board of Supervisors meeting, therefore the chairman tabled it, sandbagged it, whatever you want to call it. Clearly, this puts the whole issue of how the fairness of this gets put in light. And so,
Okay,
I'd like for it to be resubmitted. I'm making that motion to the Board of Supervisors for their consideration at the next meeting so that it's not buried. Yeah, there it is.
The recommendation is for the Board of
Oh,
Supervisors.
thank
I've
you.
got plenty of them.
I'm glad. You should, then you won't lose one.
I've got an electronic copy.
You won't lose that either, like you did this one.
The memo is to the Board of Supervisors to complain or contact the city council. Is that correct?
You can read, I'm sure you've read it 2 or 3 times, madam.
I don't have it in front of me, I'm asking if that's correct. The retraction requested.
Would you hand this to Madam Tellman, Commissioner
Basically, you're requesting that the Board of Supervisors contact the city election officials.
Tellman? I'm just saying to the Board of Supervisors, please let the city know that this is a possible irregularity. They ought to openly investigate.
That's not the word we've been using. Irregularity is different from violation of law. I mean, from what Barbara said, it's not an irregularity.
It's
Well,
a
that's
possible
correct.
irregularity, I
Is that a
think is what
violation
it
of the
said.
law?
Well,
I'm not an
I'm not in agreement necessarily that it's not a violation of law.
well, that's
In
a
a
second
general
question.
election,
yeah.
it would not be a violation of law, I'm certain, in a election for a party. And often those elections disclose on the ballots who is what member of what party. But in a general election, I'm not certain that's not a clear violation. So let's not assume that it's not a violation. There's a complaint out there. I think the Board of Supervisors should support election integrity. They should take a stand against every voter repressive kind of an act that we've done. There is an open belief in this county that we try to do our best to address that the elections are rigged.
That goes broader. I think you should avoid that issue.
Well, I'm just saying, I can't tell you how many phone calls I
Well,
got
I
like
mean,
that.
the basic fact is, you want to talk about rigging, we have a duopoly, and they rig the rules for them from their party.
That could well be.
And I take issue with the word irregularity, since it has been regularly done for the last 6 years by the city, and it is regularly done by the mayor of the county.
It is noted that you voted against that the last time we had this discussion.
So I did too, and I don't understand, if your concern is with the issue, why don't you invite Roger or somebody from the city, come talk to us about it?
I will.
Because
If-
then.
So we don't have that authority, do
Let me
we?
finish. I mean, they may decline, they may decline, but from a technical point of view, I was wondering, you know, what kind of procedure there is for managing the setup of the ballot that way. You know, where did that come from? Has that been there since 1892, or is that recent,
Well,
or?
I can explain the procedure in the city. They do their own mailing, they don't send it out to Runback. They have their own mailing equipment, sorting equipment, the whole bit. And so the company, it's Whitney Bowes, programs their computers to print what they want printed on the envelopes. I talked about the envelopes. And the party information there is for the benefit of the primary, so it's very easy to sort out the ballots by party at a primary election. That's an advantage to them. They could remove it at the general election, but in order to do so, someone from Pitney Bowes would have to come and do it. They cannot alter their program. So it's just a matter of convenience and expense that they leave it that way for the general election.
But that's not my question. My question is, step back, who decided, who told Pitney Bowes to program it that way?
The city,
Who's the city?
the city clerk's office.
The clerk himself makes
I
the
don't know,
decision?
I can't tell you.
Is that an independent, autonomous decision by the clerk, or is it,
I
is
can't
there?
tell you if the board of supervisors, I mean, the city council has to vote on that kind of a detail. I doubt it, but I.
Well, I'm not, I don't know what to expect, but there may be some rule or law, state law, that's relevant.
Barbara, can you confirm that during a primary, the party on the ballot, or at least the party that the voter is voting for on the affidavits is used to sort the affidavits to put them in voting for Republican, so the Republican ballots versus Democrat ballots versus the other parties? Is that how it's used?
I'm not sure it's actually sorted, but it helps them in their quantifying how many Republicans and how many ballots have come in from each party when they go use it, when the ballots come in.
Would say to that, Grady, in the primary, a Republican can only vote a Republican ballot. The Democrat can only vote the Democratic ballot. The only place where this might be of any use is on the no party declared, where they get a card, and if a no party declared wants to vote in a primary, they have to request a ballot from a particular
Party.
Democrat.
And
Understood.
if they want to, for whatever reason, because my question, when I saw the envelope where it says party Republican, it says voting party Republican, it would say party Democrat, voting party Democrat. I would, if I were going to have a concern, it would be if it said party Democrat, voting party Republican. That can't happen.
I think the difference is it's party independent or no party, and
Yeah.
which ballot did they choose? That's
Yeah,
all.
I mean, there's no way the city clerk knows how you voted in the general election. They can't, because you have both Democrat and Republican and Libertarian and Green on the same ballot, and there's no requirement that you vote for the same party through the whole ballot. So the voting party doesn't make any sense.
Well, again, I was wondering if they were sorting it in order to have ballots in the primary election, so that the ballots would all be one party or another party
No,
before they tabulate.
I don't believe they were sorting the paper ballots, but I believe the computer.
A naive question, if you've got really great computer, why do you need to sort? Why can't you have absolute anonymity and sort it after you open the ballot with some sort of?
You're going to have a ballot color.
I'm sorry?
You're going to have a ballot color anyway, your ballots are identified by.
But that's different, that's not visible in the envelope, is the color of the ballot visible?
No, I'm saying in a primary, they're right away, they know the party anyhow, they're counting votes by party.
I think the concern is that there's a chance for mischief if the name of the party is on the outside of the envelope.
I
But it's
believe
not on the outside.
It's on, it shows through.
It can be seen.
It's on the outside and it's also on the inside on the affidavit,
And apparently.
which gives you another opportunity when you're reviewing signatures to decide what your district is, if you want it that way.
The charges that I heard from your party chair as to what would happen as a result of this is number one, that the mailman might throw away Republican ballots. And that is already a considerable major federal crime, it's a felony, that they may do it, but why would they do it more for Republicans than Democrats? There are a lot of questions there. His other reason was that he thought when they got into the recorder's office that the recorder's people would discard Republican ballots. And they are under very strong rules of how they handle ballots, which I believe you have received a copy. And if they were to do that sort of thing again, it would be a major crime, a felony. And I don't believe many of them would be willing to sacrifice their jobs and their livelihood for doing that sort of thing. So your reasoning to me is spurious.
I'm not trying to reason with you, Madam Tillman.
Okay.
That, you allow her to speak.
Sure.
What our chairman said is what our chairman said. That's just one of the many kinds of mischiefs. I'm not sure what the plural of that word over here is, maybe somebody can help me, that could occur. Whatever it is, it's wrong. And the opportunity for it shouldn't be there and shouldn't be allowed. And just this conversation that we've had now for over 10 minutes tells me that my instinct on this, when I said investigate, we're asking the county to ask the city to investigate, and maybe should have used the word transparently, how this occurred and what the consequences of it are. Now, those aren't my exact words on that motion, but that's exactly what we said. And I find it irregular as hell, if I may, that something as serious as this got buried.
Are you raising your hand or scratching?
Well, actually, I didn't get to finish my complaint or my observation about this irregularity that's not an irregularity, apparently.
Well,
Which is why,
we
who
don't
made
know.
up that rule? Why did we allow one person, maybe on the basis of what he or she considered as reasonable or whimsical? I mean, there are plenty of people who've said in high office, well, maybe what I did is immoral or wrong, but it's not illegal. And, you know, that's not a good way to run a railroad.
Well, I believe Barrow stated, correct me if I'm wrong, it's used in the accounting of the numbers of ballots in the primary of Republican versus Democrat versus Green versus Libertarian.
Right.
And so it was a process thing, it was part of the process of handling ballots. Apparently when this started, when they ordered the equipment from Bickel.
No, I understand that, but why didn't they have it completely anonymous? I mean, they could have made it more anonymous.
The gist is that, number one, there's a barcode that gets read when the ballots are scanned by the affidavit scanning machine, and that gives the voter uniquely for that affidavit, and therefore all the information on that voter is available, and the computer can calculate how many Republican ballots, how many Democratic, Libertarian, all the different parties. And so at this point, I don't think it's needed for that purpose. So I don't see the need for it going forward.
Actually, this may be a totally moot point, because the city did not have sufficient turnout in this election. According to a recent legislative change, the city has to have, I forget what the percentage is, do you know?
I do not, I know what you're referring to,
It's
but
a
I don't know.
percentage of the vote in the last gubernatorial election, and if they fall below that turnout percentage, then they have to go to even year elections, in which case Brad's going to be running them anyway, unless they go to court and drag it out for several years.
Which they will do.
Yeah. So that's a whole other issue, whether the city will even continue doing this on elections.
So
And as far as Roger Randolph was concerned, he said, if they don't want it there, it's no big deal, I'll just take it off. No big deal.
So the issue then, Arnie, is that do we want to just let this drop because it seems like some kind of little innocent thing? Do we want to pay attention to those that say, hey, why the hell, I don't trust these guys, why is my party on here? Do we want to allow that to continue to affect voter turnout?
So I must be misunderstanding. So this thing did go to the Board of Supervisors, right?
Yes.
Went to the chairman only.
Okay, but it went to the Board of Supervisor, and your motion was to do it again.
Yes.
And you even said
because
it could be the chairman, so it's just
No, no.
doing the same
Well,
thing again.
and my motion is not doing the same thing. I'm going to be a little broader this time. It needs to go to the Board of Supervisors with the request that it be discussed at their next meeting.
If that's
And
the right,
it be circulated.
It doesn't say that on there,
No.
right?
No, it does not say that. This was our motion.
so that request is coming from Brian?
That has to come from Brian. And if the chairman of the Board of Supervisors decides to table it, I suppose that's his prerogative. But to me, that's a violation of trust like we have in here, that we try to talk to each other, that he didn't follow through with. This is a hot button issue. It's not like it's you ran over my dog in the street and, well, we all feel sorry about that, but that's not a board issue. I'm sorry. I think there was complicity in this, and I think the way it came down was so that it would not be on the board's agenda before the election or on the day of the election. And that's the way it went. That's in effect a cover-up of the problem.
So I was one that voted to, yes, say
Yes.
that, okay? But to me, it seems like that was done, and because the Board of Supervisors didn't do what you want them to do, that doesn't mean,
No, the Board of Supervisors as itself did not do what we wanted to do. The chairman of the board tabled it. It never went to the board, it was
okay,
never distributed.
but,
How do you know that?
but,
I know that from having talked to the two Republican commissioners.
So can't they put it on the agenda?
Well, in my opinion, they should have, but they didn't know about it.
Wait a minute, you talked to them about it,
I talked to them about it since.
so there's still
I
time.
talked to him
It's
about it.
not a
Pardon?
dead end. It's not a dead end, there's still an opportunity to bring it up, right?
I don't know. I have no idea. There's mysteries of the world that we don't always know, and so I'm saying we resubmit it.
Can we ask Beth an opinion about whether their office dealt with this?
We received a copy of the memo from Mr. Cote when he appeared on the 11th floor last week, post Board of Supervisors meeting. I can confirm that. We had not seen it before then.
Okay. Just since my name is the one being dragged through the mud here, as the person who did something obsequious, my understanding after the last meeting was that I was to send this memo to the Board of Supervisors. In my mind, when I sent it to the chairman, it went to the board. That was to make sure, if we're gonna play same song, second verse, that I handle it differently this time. I will send it to Michael and I don't know if you can distribute to the Board of Directors, the Board of Supervisors, or if it has to go to the clerk of the board.
I have no clue. What I did last
When they
question.
go to trash.
I'll go there.
And I know everything that gets put on the board, and correct me if, or on the board agenda, goes through the clerk of the board.
Absolutely.
So it might be more appropriate to send it to the clerk of the board, asking to have it put on the Board of Supervisors agenda.
Well, if you're asking me,
I am.
okay. Anything that's sent to the clerk of the board automatically gets distributed to all of the board members. If you send it directly to the chairman of the board, he's
May or may
go
not.
ahead, stop there.
Okay.
So just FYI, if you want to facilitate communication, that's the best way to do it.
So then amend my resolution to send this to the clerk of the board.
Okay. With a specific request that it be included on the agenda.
Discussed, yes.
They
That's
won't,
right.
they may or may not discuss.
Okay, that's fine, whatever you.
I figured out they do what they want to do.
Suggest, Mr. Borozan, we'd like to see this get in the open.
Yeah,
Well, and I believe the chairman would be the person to approve an item being placed on the agenda.
but it can't be presented to the chairman from any of the supervisors.
Absolutely. Oh, and a supervisor can put it on the agenda. It's just ultimately, I believe he determines the
Right.
agenda.
And just so you understand,
Who's you?
you, that this may or may not get discussed even if it is on the agenda, because a good number of agenda items, agenda number 1, I move the item. Second, objections, hearing none, motion passed. Now, that's the extent of the discussion.
I'd like to make a recommendation that Beth identify herself for the record so we know who she is, what office she works for, just for that record, since this is being recorded.
Fair enough. My name is Beth Borozan, and I'm honored to serve as Supervisor Christie's chief of staff.
Thank you very much. And a motion has been made, I would suggest,
have a
as we still
second.
have item
Second.
agendas and we're running short.
Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
The chair
Some people are
abstained.
opposed.
The chair abstained.
You can't see, sorry.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah.
I don't know,
We just voted, do you vote to have it resubmitted?
I do, I vote for aye, but I believe the bylaws do not allow abstention vote.
Okay, then I vote no. So it failed, or it passed.
Did you vote, Art?
Yes. Why don't the bylaws allow?
It voted, it passed 5-2.
Back then, could you want to explain why don't the bylaws allow?
This is what the bylaws say.
I believe I now, look, but.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine. No. Don't worry about it, I didn't abstain, so abstention is not an issue, Michael.
Okay, for the record again, Commissioner Cote made a motion to have the letter sent to the clerk of the board and be placed on the Board of Supervisors
That's
agenda.
the request.
I did not hear who seconded that
That's
motion. Grady Rhodes was seconded. All right, thank you.
Okay. That having been said, I'd like to close this. I am irate the way this was handled. Chairman Bickel, once before we went through this with a letter to the Secretary of State, and you very vociferously said, do you want us to quit? Do you want me to resign? And all of us, all 3 Republicans, Libertarian, we all said no. We thought that because we thought you could fairly represent the outcome of this board. I don't believe you can do that anymore.
Well, you have a chance to vote in January.
Excuse me, I have the floor, Madam Tellman.
Actually, you don't, you weren't recognized. You just decided.
Oh,
you were
okay,
concerned.
well, that's just tough, because here we go. I demand, I allege that you're a part of a possible cover-up of these problems with the ballots, and that you've demonstrated your ability to play politics in this quite well, and you should resign from this board.
Oh, I'm not resigning from the commission.
Okay, that's fine. You still should resign from this board. That is my opinion.
Duly noted. And since it's been recorded, it's a matter of public record. And in defense of myself, I did exactly what I was told to do, and that was submit a memo to the Board of Supervisors.
There's if I make one comment, there's a phrase that comes to mind. It's malicious compliance. We don't know what that means.
Yeah, I certainly do, and I appreciate your concern. Moving on. Commission composition. And this is here under my name, but it's certainly not something that I'm going to carry the flag on. This is Arnie's concern.
I simply raised this point because, for two reasons. One is that we have ignored historically the fact that approximately a third of the electorate is not represented in any way on this commission. And I'm not sure how that should be done, but I think it should be considered because Mr. Huckleberry will be probably wanting to come and talk about this issue at some point next year. So I think we should have some ideas ourselves about what we might say or what questions we might ask. And I think we should consider some procedure for having independents as members of the commission, whether they vote or not, it's up for discussion. There could be classes of voting rights or privileges. That's open. But I do think it's, if you're concerned about trustworthiness and the image of reliability, that to ignore 1/3 of the electorate makes no sense. So I'm just putting out to hear what people think. If you don't think it's important, I won't be that surprised, but I am interested in hearing ideas. Yes.
I think it's a really good idea. I just don't see how you would choose the independent or independents. Right now, the party chairs choose their representative. There is no independent party. So how would you pick somebody or people?
Well, I have some ideas about that, but I think that's something that everybody should think about, because it's not impossible to do. There are independent organizations, statewide, countywide, and nationally. So, those organizations could be involved. I happen to know one, never met him personally, but there's one leader of that movement in Pima County who went through some effort to try to get independents' right to vote in elections and what's called blanket primary recognized at the state. And I won't say anything because I don't have evidence except from him, hearsay evidence, that certain people in power threatened him so that he dropped the issue. So anyway, it's an important issue, and I think it's a form of disenfranchisement in a sense.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Do we not, when we have partisan voting, allow independents to participate in either the Democratic Party or the Green Party or the Red Party or whatever? Are they not allowed to vote in those elections in this state?
Yes,
These are not close
Yes and no.
elections.
They're not allowed to vote in Libertarian primary.
Right.
Libertarian primaries, am I correct?
I believe
That
that
is a closed
is
primary.
currently the case.
So if
We have changed a couple of times.
So I'm not arguing against what you're saying, but I think that in many ways, or in some ways, that selection has been drawn by virtue of the way they vote. So they vote either Republican primary or Democratic primary, apparently not the Libertarians. I'm not sure what they have against it.
Well, do you have a primary, or do you have?
I believe currently we do not have primaries.
So the argument for it is that if the
No,
taxpayer.
that's not true. I think sometimes we do.
Okay.
But
You have primaries, but they're closed.
yes.
Okay, if you're having primaries and they're open and the taxpayers are paying for it,
Yes.
then that list of candidates that comes out of those primaries gets onto the ballot for the general election. I, as a taxpayer, should have the right to express my preference for every contest so that I can have an equal influence on the outcome of the elections. Simple as that.
Chair recognizes the chair. This was an issue that was brought up at the last Democratic State Committee meeting by the Maricopa County Court. And in a move to try and allow independent participation in the presidential, or no party declared participation in the presidential preference election. And to your point, in a presidential preference election, you're not voting for a candidate. What you are voting for, certainly as far as the Democratic Party is concerned, and I believe it's the same with the Republican Party, is the percentage of electors that are going to be sent to the Democratic and or the Republican National Convention to select the candidate. If you don't want to play in my party, then you don't have to be sending you don't have to have a voice in who my delegate to select my presidential candidate is going to be. That's the unique thing, is presidential candidates are not nominated by popular vote. They are nominated at a convention. And the presidential preference election is a downstream function of that convention.
It's not simply a downstream function of that convention. It has that function, but it also produces the candidates that are going to end up on the general ballot.
No, it doesn't.
Correct?
No.
Sure it does.
No. The convention determines who's going to be on the general ballot.
But it's part of the process that leads to that, right?
That's right.
So the party limits the use of that information to determine who's going to go to a meeting and make the decision.
That's right. The people that end up being delegates, certainly to the Democratic Convention.
So why should the public pay for that?
We have the room scheduled, excuse me for interrupting. We have the room scheduled from
I'm
9
sorry.
until 12.
Is there somebody waiting to get, is there somebody waiting to get in here?
No, sir,
Okay.
but we're still under the time requirement for the room.
Okay.
We can
Does our
extend,
rent- does our
no
rent go up?
complaining, but I'm just letting you know.
It doubles.
And I think this,
That's all?
this discussion has gone way off the agenda item of composition.
Yeah.
Well, yes and no, but if you want to stop it in the interest of time, okay, I just wanted to put it on the agenda.
We're certainly way off of, well, we are. PPE, do we have to talk about the PPE anymore?
I've told you everything I know.
I think we beat that horse to death. Voting access for the disabled. And I don't know who put this on.
I did, I asked this to be circulated. There is a national group that is questioning voting access for the disabled nationally. They're looking at Arizona specifically. Are we doing everything we can to make access possible? And I thought it would be very useful for us to have a speaker from the disabled community, the people that you ordinarily deal with on these issues, to come and tell us whether we are actually in Pima County fulfilling everything we could be doing, or if there are still things we could be doing. And I would like to have, not this time obviously, but next time I would like to hear from the disabled community to hear whether in fact we are in full compliance.
I won't speak too long on this, but in advance of every election, we do a ADA accessibility survey.
I didn't mean for you to do that. I mean, if we would have some assurance from the disabled community that they're satisfied or not satisfied, then we would.
And where I'm going with this is that we invite them to be part of that survey of those polling places, including the form that we use that is recommended by the U.S. Department of Justice. So as far as what our legal requirements are, I think we've met them. Whether we have met their non-legal requirements, I'll certainly invite some.
Yes, we're going to be investigated presumably by this outside groups. Would be helpful.
Go
to be ahead of.
Shoot.
And I have no doubt that we are not, I believe we are doing everything we can, but I think it would be useful to at least hear that from the disabled advocates.
The only suggestion I would make is, if we're going to do that, like all things with elections, please invite the Democrat and the Republican. And if there are some that are in the Green or Libertarian,
Well, who I'm likely to reach out to is an organization mentioned in the news piece, and that's the Arizona Center for Disability Law. They are, to my knowledge, not partisan in nature. They are just strictly advocating for disabled, period.
And you go to them when you're being involved.
I do, sure.
So that's a future agenda item in January.
I have a question that's puzzled me for a while, and I know probably, Brad, you know the answer to this. But if you read a little bit about this, the disabled, and what they would like to see or have in the elections is they want to be visible that they're part of the community. It seems to come out strong and clearly. That may, in fact, be in this article that you circulated with information. If we're going, as we've been going, to elections that are almost entirely vote by mail, how do you accommodate that? Because I think it's inevitable, as we need to talk about this, as we go down the road, we're headed inevitably towards them, like the city just had, an all-mail, MAIL system. Now, they did set up voting machines like I've seen you have when we do it in the county, a dupe. And I personally witnessed some people using that in the vote. But I'm not sure what the answer is to this. It's kind of a complexity. What do you
If I
see
follow
in the
me,
industry
so
as the answer?
when an individual who is, I'm going to use a disability of vision disabilities, right?
Right.
There are a variety of disabilities out there, but that's the one I can speak most to. Is another organization that we work here. We have the benefit, in my opinion, of the Arizona State for the Deaf and Blind here in Tucson. We work with them quite a bit too. So for persons with disabilities who request a braille ballot, we work with that institution to actually generate a braille ballot for an individual who might need one. Some people like a large text ballot. In other words, I mean, it's self-explanatory, a large text ballot. We are able to generate that as well. But we have to wait for them to let us know of that need. Individuals who may have a physical disability, I'm assuming that they are assisted by individuals that they trust at their home or their daycare center and things of that nature. If an individual is assisted in marking their early ballot, there is a place on the outside of the affidavit envelope that states I was assisted by blah, blah, blah.
So we have this dilemma going forward. We can have a mail-in ballot, but we can't do a mail-in ballot, all mail-in ballot, and we have to kind of address that carefully, I think, whatever you said.
I don't think that's what I said at all.
Well,
John, there's an issue that you're losing track of that's important to people who feel marginalized.
yes.
And that, in fact, the
And
independents
that's what I'm
nationally
addressing.
are doing this. They're trying to look at ways they can become involved. And for example, to become part of the debates. So, as strange as it may seem, there's a big movement nationally to petition the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party for some reason, to allow them to have participation in the national debates for presidential elections.
we do,
I'm sorry?
we do.
That's an
Bernie Sanders is there.
No, that's a good joke, but that's not what they want. So, you know, they're,
Wait a minute, did you just
There-
say that Bernie Sanders is disabled?
No, he's an independent.
He's pardon?
He's an independent.
He's an independent, I see.
he wasn't.
We're talking about disability
Still
still, are we not?
But in any case, they want some serious participation. They don't want token image participation. They're looking for some real connection with what's going on.
So what is the solution to this?
I don't know, but that's the problem.
It sounded like to me this is gonna be put on the ballot for another day anyway.
I'm sorry?
It It sounded to me that this was gonna be put on the ballot another day. Sorry, agenda item. Sorry about that. And that maybe we would be able to discuss this further at that time. I'm gonna hold my comments on this because,
No, John.
in consideration of time.
Yeah.
Anything else?
So we're talking about next
Your
board.
future agenda items? Michael, what do you have on your list so far?
Okay. What I have so far is, number one, election of chair and vice chair for January, because we're not having a meeting next month. That's already been decided on. Prospective legislative changes, because they're gonna start doing stuff. I don't know who's taking over that, but that was on last year's January meeting, so I'm assuming it should be on this year's.
I think Barbara Tellman was doing that.
2019 annual report, EI ISIC summary by Steve Pothier. Monthly report to the Board of Supervisors has been recommended by John Cote. Responsibility of commission, John again. Voting access for the disabled, Barbara Tellman and Brad Nelson.
I have an additional item. We brought up the topic earlier, or in previous meetings, about the money coming from the federal government through the state to use for security. Brad had mentioned that maybe we could use it for cameras. I think it might be a good idea to discuss that a little bit more, of looking at what sort of camera system, how much money it would cost, and see if there is money left over.
Okay, so the item would be HAVA funding for security?
Cybersecurity.
Okay. HAVA funding for cybersecurity.
That's what I recommend.
The last time we discussed it, you talked about what you were going to request.
And
Right, it wasn't that you were getting the money definitely.
Brad, will you speak on that? I mean, as far as it says.
I've reached out to the Secretary of State's office to find out how an entity, county, gets that money. We have to have an assessment by them first, and then what they, in that assessment, say, well, here's what you need to fortify, for lack of a better term, then we apply for those funds to meet those assessment needs. And that assessment, I've reached out to them, they are still in the process of doing that assessment. Not for us singularly here in Pima County, but elsewhere.
So would they have, you think they'd have feedback in January?
Excuse me, you guys have taken off onto a topic
Well,
instead of addressing the future agenda items. So I have HAVA for cybersecurity.
I was wondering who to assign that to, that was my point. So Brad,
Sure.
and should it be
Sure.
tabled if they're not gonna have it, or?
Yeah, well, should have enough, certainly in 60 days, I'll know where we are progressing.
Anything else?
Not for a future agenda item, but,
Future meeting dates.
may I? For a
Yes.
second? For the January meeting, I'm going to try and transition this gentleman out of doing the record keeping that he has been doing on behalf. I will let the chair and other members know, as you may know, Mr. Dale is soon to be a resident of the state of Alaska. And before he leaves, he's going to get this new person, yet undetermined who that's going to be his understudy. So we may see Michael and person X here at the January meeting, but it will be to transition person X into what Michael has done for us in the past.
Could I make a request?
Yeah.
Could you make it a person that did what Sarah did rather than what Michael did?
You guys got spoiled with Sarah.
We did.
It doesn't have to be that elaborate, but it is much easier to do any kind of reporting to anybody off of minutes than it is off of video.
We'll see what we do.
I would appreciate that greatly.
Michael's done a terrific job. It was very innovative, what you've done for the Spectre Minutes.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Just because I can't hear.
And just forewarn us, maybe forearmed a little bit, if we're going to an issue where we have to, or we would like to submit a monthly report as the meetings go on, it's probably going to need to have the video transcribed minutes. Like a regular, meeting.
I'm open to any suggestion, but I'm not agreeing to anything.
Anything else?
Tradition continues.
Levoy, do you have anything else if you're still there?
Levoy's at beer 30. Gone.
Apparently.
He's gone.
High time.
Okay, we stand adjourned.
Thank you, Master.
That's okay.